Hey guys. This is part 5 of What If Naruto Was Banished to Unknown Lands. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 22, Rogue Wave. 5 hours after Irika's rescue, give me a status report. Danzo ordered. He had set up a temporary office in a building adjacent to the now defunct Hokage's tower. He glanced up at where it used to be angrily. Long had it been a symbol of Konoha's might. No matter. I will make it bigger and better than before, a testament to my greatness. We have found the bodies of several routes leading into training ground number 4. We've also found the body of one of your honor guard, code-named Lizard. One of our sensors detected the residue of Naruto and 3 others heading off to the East Star. There are no tracks to follow, we are unsure of their method of travel. Danzo swore angrily. Losing one of his 4 guardians was a bigger blow to him than the Hokage's tower. He'd invested a lot of time and effort into their selection, development, and training. East? Why east? They would have had more places to run if they went west. Danzo thought for a moment. Didn't the Jinchuriki once do a mission to the east? In Wave Country? Danzo had monitored everywhere they let their little weapon ran off 2 years ago. I don't know, sir, the root member responded. Danzo scowled at him, his mind working at 1,000,000 miles a minute. He may have been many things, but Danzo had a keen mind for war and politics. They must be heading to Wave Country. I had sent a notice to them a few weeks ago along with all the other smaller countries bordering us to become one of my territories or perish. I've yet to get a response. He looked hard at the root member. Perhaps an example needs to be set. 2 birds with 1 stone. I want you to gather a force of 300 and pursue the Jinchuriki and his friends. He must pay for his crimes against Konoha. If he is, as I suspect, sheltering in Wave Country, then they are harboring a fugitive from Fire and Earth countries. We will invade and suppress them. That should send a clear message to the other border countries to not delay in joining with me. Danzo glanced down at his papers. I expect you to be ready to leave within 2 hours. The root member cleared his throat. May I suggest, sir, that we use a primarily Iwagakure force? We are down to a few hundred loyal root members, while there are many IWA ninja about the city. It would be useful to send them into battle where casualties may be high. Danzo smirked. Good. See to it. 3 hours later, Niji jumped to the next branch, keeping an eye on Tenten as she kept pace with him. He noticed, not for the first time, how delicately and silently she moved. It was quite a contrast to her proficiency with weapons. He grimaced as he heard the whispering noise of the force Danzo had committed to this chase. Several hundred ninja, both root and standard Chunin and Jounins from IWA, were all given one order and one only. Kill Naruto and anyone he's with. Niji knew that to argue with that command would not only be suicide, but the Danzo loyalists were undoubtedly keeping an eye on everyone in the force. Any sign that he was not doing his best would give away his true loyalties. He scowled, jumping to the next branch. He wasn't sure yet how not to do his best to kill Naruto and make it appear that he was. That didn't really seem to be a problem yet, though. He'd never seen anyone move as fast as Naruto was moving with his friends. Niji could pick up minor chakra bursts, but they were so far ahead that he was unsure. It seemed as if Naruto and his friends blinked into and out of existence miles apart. They were in no way keeping up with them. Instead, it was very basic deduction that kept them on this path. Naruto was obviously going to Wave Country. He glanced at Tenten and knew she was thinking the same thing. Why were they running there? It was essentially a dead end. Unless he had a boat waiting to escape, and even if he did, Danzo's forces would find them even easier. A person on a boat was a much easier target than one on land. Tenten leapt to the ground, the types of trees in this area not allowing for branch traveling. They raced full speed ahead, to meet their friend in combat. Senji sighed audibly. The Naruto clone carrying him grinned as they popped into existence again. Senji looked around and all of the others were similarly being carried. Nagi didn't look much happier either. They would have been happier moving of their own volition. But they'd caught sight of the Konoha forces earlier in the day, and they needed the head start that reaching Wave Country would give them. Irika was being handled very carefully by 2 Naruto clones, as was Anko. Senji hoped Lady Tsunade would reach there quickly. In his head he did some repeated math and made plans. Naruto says the wind stream to wave takes 3 hours. We sent our message about 2 hours ago. At the rate Naruto is moving, we'll be at wave before her. Hopefully she did not come alone. We'll need all the help we can get against that Konoha army after us. Naruto himself looked concerned. He was getting tired. He'd been pushing hard for the past couple of days, expending a huge amount of chakra in his Horatian jumps. Then that wind chakra blast destroying the Hokage tower ate up a lot of his reserves. Truth was, Naruto was ready to collapse, but his friends were counting on him, and Irika-sensei, and Enko. He glanced at both of them. The scars of Danzo's reign made Naruto angry, and fueled him to jump again and again. Not far now, almost there. Tsunade swore up and down, left and right, using every word and every language she had picked up in her travels around the world. It was a sight to behold. Shizen giggled a bit, although she too was nervous as hell. Riding the wind stream was not as fun an experience as she thought it would have been. In fact, it was downright terrifying. She glanced behind her at Jiraiya flying through the air, eyes shut tight, worry beads in his fist. Behind him were a handful of academy students she hadn't had time to properly be introduced to. It had all happened so fast. That toad had appeared, alerting Tsunade to the problem. Enko from Konoha needed a doctor, urgently. Shizen remembered Enko, a very brash ninja. Tsunade had called the other village elders together, and they'd in a matter of minutes decided a plan of action. Jiraiya had suggested they bring Inari along as he knew Wave Country, and they'd save valuable time that they may have spent lost. Inari had made some really good friends at the academy though, and they insisted on tagging along. Why Tsunade and Jiraiya had agreed to that was beyond Shizen's comprehension. Maybe it had something to do with what Mabry had said to them in hushed tones. All she knew was that she would have to look out for the 3 academy students. Especially the blind one. Shizen knew the full scale of the mess they were about to jump into. Naruto and his friends would be on the run from Konoha's forces. It would be impossible to tell how many until they got there, but if she had to guess, it wouldn't be small. So how were they supposed to escape with all these children and 2 wounded Nin? Inari glanced back at his friends and grinned at them. They all smiled back, including General Inari shook his head. How did he do that? A blind kid who sent out chakra pulses to see, like a bat's sonar waves. Gen was an incredibly skilled fighter though, and constantly amazed people by seeming to see. The 4 of them had become practically inseparable during Inari's training at the academy. While initially cautious towards him, Inari had hit it off with Siren because they were both from the eastern countries. Siren was initially from an island not far from Wave Country. His water-shifting abilities were seemingly a family trait. Inari hadn't asked how he'd ended up on the streets in the Badlands. He figured if Siren wanted to tell him, he would someday. Miron was quiet as usual, smiling but not saying much. Inari saw her eyes were closed too. He wondered if maybe she was scared of heights too, like Lady Tsunade, and he grinned even wider. But then he heard a snore and realized she'd fallen asleep. Of course. Miron could sleep anywhere. What's that down there? Siren said aloud. They all looked down. It was terrifying, the height they were traveling at. The ground was many miles below them. But they could see what Siren was pointing out, a steady stream of black dots highlighted against the landscape. It was a large movement of people through a thin patch of forest, and they were all heading in the same direction. Shit. That has to be a force from Konoha chasing after Naruto, Jiraiya said. He turned to Inari. How far are we from Wave Country? Inari looked for landmarks. At this point, a half-day's travel with no rest. Jiraiya nodded. We're going to land right before a shitstorm hits. Tsunade clicked her tongue. That boy. They flew in silence for the next 30 minutes, shooting at breakneck speed through the air. We're almost there, Inari shouted into the wind. He recognized the terrain of his homeland instantly. Inari could barely contain his excitement. He would see home for the first time in more than a year. His mother would be thrilled to see him. He felt pride swell up in his chest. She'll see I'm becoming a ninja like Naruto. Get Yoshi's contraption ready, Tsunade shouted at them all. As one they all reached for the large device in between them, the one they were all tied to by long cords for safety. Tsunade really hoped this worked. Yoshi's last words to them as they left were not the most encouraging. Flashback. You sure this will work, Yoshi? Jiraiya had asked skeptically. Yoshi shrugged. 50-50. I know 2 instances of something like this being used. A father and son team. Daedalus lived, his son died. Yoshi then grinned. Of course, that's just an inventor's fairy tale, but the science seems sound. Tsunade swore one last time as she saw a giant bridge coming towards them fast. We're here! Inari shouted. Now! Tsunade screamed as they pulled the cord on the Daedalus. The device unraveled and a pair of giant wings sprung out from the side. Thousands of small metal feathers trembled in the wind. A series of rungs under the wings snapped down. The Tengaku warriors all grabbed for the bars as the wings started to glide out of the wind stream. The width of the Daedalus was beyond the size of the wind stream, so it began to leave it. Tsunade felt when they'd left the stream, the wings above her heading for the earth below. She breathed a sigh of relief though as they seemed to catch a gust, and they glided forward swiftly. Anyone in the area who looked up would have seen what looked like a giant metallic bird, gliding down from the sky, with 7 people holding on to its wings. Ha! Yoshi has come through! Jiraiya shouted in glee. He did not like heights, but avoiding plummeting to his death definitely made his day today. No sooner had he said that than a single metallic feather broke free of the wing above him. He glanced up in horror to see that the feathers were all rattling. Another came free, then another. Jiraiya saw that the wings were wet. He glanced around and realized the sea breeze was condensing on the wings, and the glue Yoshi had used to stick the feathers was dissolving. It took all of 5 seconds for enough feathers to break free and for the Daedalus to plummet into the ocean next to the bridge, taking 7 screaming warriors with it. They all emerged from the cold water spluttering. Yoshi! Tsunade shouted angrily. I'm going to kill him. They were close to the shore, so they just swam for it. Tsunade and Shizen held onto the box of medical supplies they brought, thanking the heavens that they hadn't lost it. One last pop and they arrived, Naruto collapsing into a panting heap, his clones taking care to set down the stretcher with Anko carefully before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Senjai and Nagi looked at Naruto, feeling bad about letting him carry them. It was necessary, of course. No way they would have gotten here as fast as they did otherwise. But now Naruto was exhausted and needed to rest, and they had an army from Konoha a few hours behind them. Nagi held on to Iruka, who was still weak from the torture he had been put through. Iruka looked at him gratefully and glanced around. Villagers had started to walk over to see what the fuss was about. It took a full minute before someone recognized Naruto. It's Naruto! A vendor shouted. He had been on the unfinished bridge that day years ago and remembered the small boy with the yellow hair. Naruto was older now, and wearing white not orange, but his face was unmistakable. The crowd gathered closer now, murmuring in excitement. Not only did they remember Naruto, but the bridge builder himself had been regaling them with stories of Naruto and his heavenly city since he'd gotten back in town weeks ago. Tazuna himself pushed his way through the crowd. Naruto! He gasped in disbelief. He saw Sanjay and Nagi and was about to ask why they were there when he spied Anko on the ground and Iruka being propped up by Nagi. One quick glance at their headbands and he understood the situation. This way, hurry! He spoke with urgency in his voice, leading the way to his daughter's house. The trio from Tengaku followed without question. Naruto and Senjai picked up Anko's stretcher, walking quickly to keep up with the bridge builder. The crowd opened up to let them pass, excited faces all around them. As they got to Tsunami's house, Tazuna's daughter, they saw Inari and a very wet group of Tengaku warriors coming from the direction of the bridge. Inari saw them and waved, running fast to meet them. Both groups got to the house at the same time. It was a flurry of activity, as voices overlapped and looks of concern were shared. Tsunade immediately directed Naruto and Senjai to put Anko in the house, riffling through her medical supplies as she followed. Shizen was examining Iruka outside in the sunlight. He was weak and battered, but not much worse for the wear. His tongue, though, that was a different story. Jiraiya pulled Nagi and Senjai aside, looking to the west. After what you did, Danzo must really want your heads. We saw what looked like a full regiment sent after you. We should get out of town quickly. He moved inside to discuss this with Tsunade, who was examining Anko. Outside, everyone! She barked the command. No one brokered any argument, instead heading for the door. Jiraiya glanced at Anko's still form and swore, leaving the confines of the room. Tazuna was over with Tsunami and Inari, talking in quick soft tones that Jiraiya couldn't hear. The three insufferable academy brats were not far from Inari. Jiraiya scratched his chin. Mabry had said these three were the best fighters in the academy. He hoped the magician was right. Senjai. Scout the area as quick as you can. I need to know points of attack against this town. Now. Senjai nodded and disappeared. Nagi, Iruka and Shizen looked startled at Jiraiya. What's going on? Shizen asked. There's no way we're getting out of here before Danzo's dogs find us. Unless Tsunade says otherwise, and I don't think she will, we can't move Anko any further. It's a miracle she got this far alive. Jiraiya looked off to the west and cursed his own judgment. He should have eliminated Danzo a long time ago for the good of Konoha. He'd let this happen, even if only indirectly. The warmonger was known to the third for a very long time, and Jiraiya had wanted to eliminate him. The third had talked him out of it though, said it wasn't politically expedient. But it's an army coming here. What can we do against that many ninja? Shizen asked incredulously. We can make them work for it. Senjai reappeared, out of breath. The only way to this island is the bridge. Other than that, there's 1 mile of ocean between the island and the shore. There are no more islands nearby. Jiraiya nodded. That's what I thought. All ninja can water walk, so that's a minor problem. I have a seal that I can put in the water surrounding the island, preventing water walking. It'll cause very choppy and turbulent surface water. That will make it hard for any but the best to focus chakra well enough to water walk. I'm going to place it on some rocks and scatter them in the water. Nagi nodded. There will be some who will manage it anyway, you know. The elite? Yes, Jounin would be able to, but I'm gambling that not too many Jounin are with this group. It should be mostly Chunin level ninja. Okay, that means the majority of the force has to come across the bridge, Senjai said. Tazuna and Inari had walked over, the academy's students in tow. Yes, a single point of attack. We will have to defend that as best we can, Jiraiya replied. But not yet. I can buy us some time setting up a trap zone a half-mile leading up to the bridge. He smiled evilly. I have a lot of tricks up my sleeve. I should be able to bog them down for a while. A day maybe. Just then Tsunade emerged. Shizen, I need you in here. She looked bleakly at Jiraiya. Any chance we can move her? Jiraiya asked. No. I will do what I can to save her, but, even if she lives, she might never. Angrily Tsunade brushed the angry tears from her eyes and went back inside, Shizen hurrying after her. Jiraiya turned back determinedly. We will stand and repulse this force from Konoha. Yes, sensei. The academy students, Inari, Senjai and Nagi all echoed. We will not run. A man shouted amongst the crowd, his sentiment being repeated around the square. Tazuna had called everyone in the town together to warn them of Danzo's approach. There is a chance they just want Naruto and his team, and will leave us unharmed. Why should we get involved? A fat merchant shouted out. He was booed and disappeared amongst the anger of his fellow citizens. We knew this was a possibility. Ever since news of Konohagakure's conquest of Iwagakure, we knew the Fire Country would eventually set its eyes on us. That day has come, the mayor of the city spoke eloquently and bravely. Tazuna knew the man well, had seen him grow into a fine young man. He was also one who had stood that day on the bridge and faced down Gato's mercenary army. If we stand up to the Fire Country, who will we trade with? Our main trade lanes are through their lands. Our pride as a country is worth more than money. Years ago it took the courage of a handful of children to show us the way and to give us back our pride. I say to you, we will not relinquish it now. The mayor shouted back. Tazuna was impressed despite himself. In the few short years for this level of pride to develop in his previously defeated countrymen. It warmed his heart. Kaiza would be proud. What can we do to help? The mayor turned and asked Tazuna and the Tengaku warriors behind him. Jiraiya frowned. We don't want civilians getting hurt. Anyone who can fight is welcome to, but we urge everyone else to leave this town, head to the other side of the island, to the capital. You will be safe there. Fight, you say? A voice drifted out of the crowd. But for which side? Should Takada throw his lot in with the likely winners of this conflict? Should he side with the underdogs, defending a wretched island from a wicked despot? How do the patterns of Takada's path unfold? Only time will tell. Jiraiya looked startled at the man who spoke. 6 feet tall, with spiky black hair, and a long ponytail that reached his waist. He carried what could only be described as a giant meat cleaver strapped to his back. His clothes were hidden beneath a large gray duster that reminded Jiraiya of styles he had seen in the northern lands. There he goes again. Talking in third person. I hate it when he does that. Acting all self-important. A smaller guy, who had to be less than 5 feet tall, poked the tall one. Nobody cares. Shut the hell up. You think these people need to hear your inner monologue? The smaller man's upper arms were adorned with tattoos that led into 2 brass and copper gauntlets on his forearms. His bald head was also covered in tattooed symbols that led down his neck under his shirt. Jiraiya would have bet even money that the symbols were a form of seals that connected from his head to his arms. A large copper buckle on his belt showed the symbol for Kumo, but had a line scratched through it. 2 small daggers were shoved into his waistband. Takada will one day kill Masahiro. That is assured. One day he will go too far. The tall one murmured indignantly. Oh, dry up, the bald one said. Oi. Looks like a good fight about to go down. We normally get paid for this sort of thing. The mayor looked at them in disbelief. Who are you? The name is Masahiro. This tall gentleman with the sense of importance is Takada. Our other friend is around here somewhere, probably sleeping off last night. We were waiting on our client, to guard him on his journey to Sunagakure. It's a long, dangerous trip, you know. You're hired bodyguards. Oi, we prefer the term executive escort and protection agents. The small one grinned. So who's gonna pay our fee for joining in this little fracas? Jiraiya smirked. You're welcome to sit it out. Maybe Danzo's men will spare your life if we're defeated. Then again, maybe not. The tall one shifted to the left, holding his chin in serious thought. Takada sees the truth in what the Toad Sannin is saying. Takada has so many roads to walk down, 42 to be exact. The love of his life awaits him at this very moment with bated breath, her heaving bosoms glistening in the noonday sun as she stares off into the distance. Thoughts of Takada filling her mind. Masahari smacked Takada behind his head. What did I just say? You don't even have a girlfriend, you lunatic. Takada murmured softly. Takada could though, one day, depending on the path. Fine, we'll pitch in. Just tell us what spot you want protected and it's done, Masahari said frustratingly. Jiraiya nodded, pleased with that. Right. Everyone else, please start the evacuation. This isn't a battle that can be won with pitchforks and crossbows. This is an all-out ninja fight. So please stay low until it's over. He turned and walked hurriedly back towards the bridge, mentally mapping out the seals he'd use on the water disruption plan, plus many little nasties to slow down the advancing forces. Inari and his friends were all tossing rocks into the waters as far as they could throw. Each rock had a tiny seal inscribed on it. Wherever they tossed a rock, a circle of 100 yards glowed on the water's surface, then disappeared. They were just trying to make sure there wasn't any space for a ninja to pass safely. Jiraiya had quickly raced as far as half a mile away from the bridge. The force from Konoha couldn't be too far now. Jiraiya started scratching seals into rocks, trees, anything he could see. Then he focused his chakra and the engravings disappeared, invisible. He called on 24 small toad summons and sent them off in 2 directions, to end up back in a large arc at the shoreline. They were to then move in 50 feet and meet back in the center. They'd repeat this as many times as it took to plaster the area with the pack of handwritten seals Jiraiya gave them. When he told the toads what he was intending to do, they cheered. This would be great fun. As fast as he could write, he handed out seal papers and instructions. As soon as the first set was away, he moved inwards 50 feet, laying more nasty surprises as he went. Not just seals, but physical traps as well. The Konoha forces won't know what hit them. Day 1. It was a scant 2 hours later that the leading scouts of the Konoha forces, a team of 3 IWA ninja, crossed the half-mile line to the bridge to wave. They'd been in hot pursuit mode, determined to catch their prey before they left the area. As such, they were not looking out for any traps. They triggered the first seal trap. All 3 hit what appeared to them to be a solid glass which appeared out of nowhere. In their minds, the glass drew them in, and they were trapped within it, all 3 screaming as it flew rotating end over end into the sky. In reality, they lay on the ground, comatose, their minds temporarily trapped in a seal-triggered illusion. A few more forward teams arrived mere seconds later to see the scouts petrified on the ground. They immediately halted. Trap, said the one in charge. Bring a Hyuga up here. Niji soon appeared at the front of the forces. The full 300, minus the 3 unconscious men, stood in wait behind him. He scanned the forest as best he could. It looks like the entire forest is filled with chakra. There are traps everywhere, but I can't tell exactly where each one is. Something is making them fuzzy, Niji said. The force commander nodded. This would be slow going. With even the Hyuga's eyes not being able to pinpoint the traps, they'd have to spring them, or avoid them by being extremely careful. If their prey was skilled enough to lace the forest ahead with this many traps, then they could assume the traps would be fairly effective. 5 teams. Spread out. Find a path through. The first team of IWA soldiers had a sensor type with them. He could feel the chakra levels directly to his left and right. It felt low, like they were ground traps. We'll go over here, he said, motioning for them to jump into the trees. They leapt into the tree only to find the branch under them melt, allowing their feet to sink in. One took out his sword to cut the branch, but too late as a large log came swinging down. It slammed into them, breaking them free but also cracking several ribs and sending them flying back the way they came. The second team was comprised of 1 root member and 2 IWA ninja. All were Chunin level, but had lots of combat experience. They drew their weapons and walked slowly forward, in a spearhead formation. The tiniest piece of paper on a bush ahead caught one's eye. There, he said, pointing at it. They approached cautiously. One of them performed his earth wall jutsu, sealing the bush inside a square mud room. They breathed a sigh of relief, only to realize the earth that the IWA nin had used for the jutsu had explosive tags mixed in with it. They had been buried in the ground, and the chakra he had used in the jutsu had activated them. The root member leapt backwards, the IWA ninja a hair's breadth behind, but the blast radius was ridiculous. They lay in a singed heap not far from the main Konoha forces. The other teams did not fare any better, not making any headway and ending up injured or comatose. The root commander was angry. He knew the younger root had this emotion trained out of them, but he'd been around a lot longer than most. He did not let it show though, biting down on it. This would slow them down considerably. Large-scale jutsus. Fire team at front, he called out. A trio who were capable of fire blasts stepped forward. With a nod to each other they began to throw fireballs straight ahead. The forest before them erupted in flame. 2 carefully concealed but very large explosive tags ignited under the blaze. Jiraiya was in a particularly nasty mood laying the traps, however, as these 2 had bags of iron pellets wrapped around them. The explosion rocked the front line of the force from Konoha. Nearly 20 died on the spot. Another 50 injured. The root commander himself had taken 2 pellets in his left arm. They needed medical ninja, but had come with none. For the first time he allowed his anger and frustration to boil to the surface. Shit! He ignored the stream of blood dripping down his arm, the stabbing pains. You! Send word back to Konoha that we need a team of medical ninja up here immediately. Inform Lord Danzo that we have met with stiff resistance and are working through it now. The messenger remained expressionless, but he was from IWA. Bad news was generally never well received. He'd be better off sending a clone to take the brunt of the anger from Danzo. The commander turned back to his troops. Find me a goddamned way through this mess. Day 2, Tsunade emerged, exhausted. She stared up at the mid-morning sun. A full 20 hours of operating, healing jutsu and monitoring. Shizen was fast asleep on a couch next to the bed they had Anko in. Tsunade shook her head to clear the fogginess. The depravity of what was done to Anko astounded her. She knew that many in Konoha feared Anko, detested her still, because of her affiliation with Orochimaru. But this went beyond that. This was systematic torture that would have rendered her nothing more than a pile of bruised and bleeding dead flesh if they had left them in Danzo's care for even one more day. She was angry. Angrier than she had been in a very long time. An explosion rocked the forest to the west. Across the mile-wide ocean barrier between the wave country and the land of fire, and across a large expanse of forest, she could make out a tree falling, smoke rising. She smirked. If there was one thing that Jiraiya had always excelled in, it was traps. He was creative, he was nasty, and he was strategic. She felt no sympathy though for anyone in the attacking force. For the first time, she considered Konoha her enemy. Before it had been Danzo alone. But one man could not hold on to power without help, but only either by the cowards who did nothing or the ones who sought their own power by proxy. No sympathy at all. Jiraiya smiled grimly. His traps were working perfectly, but the Konoha forces had still advanced 100 yards. It would still take them a few days to get here, though. He looked over and saw Tsunade walking towards him. Anko? He asked quietly. She'll live. How she'll be after what she went through is another question. She looked west. We still can't move her for at least another week. Jiraiya nodded, looking back at his map. Wave was a fairly large island, but the one-way in or out helped them in this case. His seal stones in the water around the coast-facing side of the island really limited access. The traps he'd laid in the forest should delay Konoha, maybe 2 or 3 more days. Then Danzo's forces would push through and they were still outnumbered. We need to whittle down the enemy. They can't arrive here at full strength, Jiraiya said. He glanced up and saw the mayor of the city walking over, followed by a larger, older man. Master Jiraiya, this is Lord Gamma of Wave Country, the mayor introduced the older man, who bowed his head respectfully to Jiraiya, who then returned the bow. Lord Gamma, I apologize for bringing this to your island. Jiraiya began. The noble waved it away. Nonsense. Not 2 weeks ago that wretched Danzo sent a formal letter demanding our surrender and absorption into his empire. We were already drafting our negative response, and expected to face such a threat from him sooner rather than later. He smirked. At least now we have 2 legendary Sannin and a host of warriors here to protect us as well. The fates have smiled upon us. Jiraiya furrowed his brow. Danzo had been looking to expand east, hoping to avoid actual battle and devour other smaller countries by fear. That may be useful information later on. It is our pleasure then to be at your service. Jiraiya smiled. The noble pointed at Jiraiya's armband. What is that a symbol of? I noticed that the others, including our sleeping Naruto, all wear it, though his is gold. This is the symbol for our new village of Tengaku. Naruto is the village leader actually. Lord Gamma laughed. I see his power to inspire hasn't faded with time. He waved his hand and 15 men came over. They wore an odd assortment of old samurai armor and a hodgepodge of ninja gear. We were beginning to prepare a defense against Danzo's imminent invasion ourselves. These are my personal guard. They're fresh volunteers, but they all will do whatever it takes to protect our island. Jiraiya looked at them skeptically, but saw the fervent earnestness in the young men's faces. They will train up well, but I'd rather not sacrifice them in this battle. You couldn't have hoped to stand up to Danzo with 15 new recruits though? The Lord of Wave shook his head. I'm afraid even though Wave has prospered in trade, much of our money went into helping the people. There isn't a whole lot for hiring an army to fight for us. Even so, the nearest sympathetic hidden village is Sunagakure, and they are on the other side of Fire Country. This is all we have, and this island is our home. We'd all have fought, but these are our strongest. Jiraiya nodded. Do any of them have any abilities I can actually use? Lord Gamma grinned. Yum over there can dream walk. Invade people's dreams and change them. Manipulate them. He said, pointing to a shy young man with eyes like coal. Kisaragi Seiman can assume the face of anyone he touches, and imitate their voice and mannerisms perfectly. Jiraiya nodded. He could use both those skills. One more so if they made it through this. Okay, send those 2 to me. The others will head over there. He pointed to a small area where Senji, Nagi, and the others were practicing. Senji was trying very hard to learn the Kawarami technique to switch places with a piece of wood. And they will train. Learn as much as they can in a short time. I expect the big attack to be in a day. 2 at most. Lord Gamma shouted the orders to his men. He nodded to Jiraiya and walked off to see about the evacuation of the city. Jiraiya looked at the 2 wave soldiers. Yum, is it? Tell me more about what you can do. The route commander scowled. Their progress was steady but slow. The Hyuga and other sensors did their best to detect the traps. Then they'd send in a single person to check it. Sometimes they lost the person, sometimes he found the trap. Most times the trap would spring. It worked, it was just slow. He'd commanded that they sleep in shifts. This campaign would take days, and he needed soldiers who were rested. The first of the sleeping soldiers awoke with a cry. The others awoke one by one, all jumping awake, some with a loud yell, others silently but just as shaken. What is going on? He demanded. Just a nightmare, sir, one said. Me too. another claimed. Soon he realized they all had a nightmare. What are you children? If you won't sleep, I'll find something for you to do. He ordered a shift change, and the next batch of soldiers to sleep lay down, watching their predecessors oddly. The commander turned back angrily to his duties. IWA ninja were never much of a threat. Surely Lord Danzo had overestimated them. A nightmare for Godsake. It took 15 minutes for the first one to wake up screaming. Yum sat in his trance-like state at the top of the hill overlooking the island, with Tsunade watching over him, making sure he didn't push himself too hard. She smiled silently, having given him the idea for the nightmares he was now inflicting on the sleeping soldiers down below across the water. It was far for him to reach, but the height meant he could reach further, if not for too long. Tsunade looked west, wondering how they'd fare when the Konoha forces finally broke through. Day 4. Naruto was anxious. He'd slept for a full 2 days and awoke to find Wave under siege. His friends were preparing for the upcoming battle, planning out streets and hiding places for when the fight entered the town itself. Ero Sennin was coordinating with his summons and laying thicker and thicker levels of seals and physical traps the closer the invaders got to the big bridge. Anko had survived the trip and the surgeries, so Tsunade had said she'd live. Naruto was grateful for that. He couldn't shake the guilt, though, of having brought this impending destruction upon Wave. He needed to do something. Something to help. Thankfully, Jiraiya had a job for him to do. Naruto was the only one who could make it to the enemy's line and bypass the thick layer of traps Jiraiya had set. His Hiraishin would put him right in the enemy camp. Or more specifically, his clones. The Konoha forces were ragged. It had been 2 days with no sleep. The nightmares were obviously a strategy of their prey. The root commander admitted begrudgingly that it was working. Lack of rest dulled their senses. His forces were mostly Chunin, and many lacked the battle experience the older Jounin had. The medical team had arrived, along with another 100 IWA soldiers to beef up his forces. A stern message from Danzo as well. Succeed or pay the price for failure. They had gotten more than halfway to the edge of the forest, but it had cost them 20 men. More were injured or incapacitated. Soon they'd be through, and then they'd make their prey pay. Hey guys. A Pop and the Jinchuriki they were pursuing appeared in their midst. He was holding a handful of exploding notes in his hands and ignited them with a grin. A barrage of kunai embedded themselves in him, only for the clone to explode in a cloud. Kage Banshin, the root commander thought as he dove for cover. The explosion rocked the clearing, sending 5 men screaming and flying in a blast of smoke and rubble. The commander ordered his men into general hidden positions. They had gotten complacent. A single camp was a single target. He tiredly wiped his eyes. Soon, he thought. Soon they'd break through and make them pay. Hey, Kakashi-sensei? Sakura broke Kakashi's train of thought. He sheepishly looked over his Ika Paradise book at her. Yes, Sakura? Their trip had been very uneventful thus far, which was just fine with all of them. They had left the ideal paradise of the Crescent Moon Kingdom yesterday on the prince's fastest ship. The prince said he now knew what Ichira's mother meant, and was going to win her back. So he'd need to stop off at her home island to speak with her, but other than that he'd gladly sail them to whichever port they chose. The girls had taken to training just as hard as Lee was. Okay, maybe not as hard as Lee, but pretty hard nonetheless. Lee was using the ship itself as his workout machine, climbing masts, and ropes and even the sails. Running on the railings of the ship, around and around in laps. Sakura was working on her taijutsu as well. Calamity was learning some basic chakra control skills and Haruka sat weaving together a new scarf. Her ninjutsu required the finest spider silk, infused with chakra during the weaving process. It allowed it to be incredibly strong, and resistant to fire attacks. But she learned that resistant was not impervious. The last scarf had been damaged badly in their adventures in the Crescent Moon Kingdom. This one was barely started. It would take days to finish, but she vowed this one would be stronger than the last. Kakashi himself was still not 100% back to normal. Using the Sharingan always did that to him. A few more days rest, with his favorite book series, and he'd be fine. Can you give me some taijutsu tips? She asked. Sure. We've got 3 days till we get to Wave Country, and the prince claims his wife back. Let's see what we can improve on. Day 5. Do you have anyone you can call for help? Lord Gama said aghast, seeing the map before Jiraiya. Konoha had expanded the size of their forces, apparently determined to take this island. Jiraiya's summoned toads had confirmed over 400 men approaching the far side of the bridge. They'd break through sometime soon and storm across it. Yes, I sent the request 3 hours ago. They should be here shortly. Naruto stood staring west. He was sure he saw movement in the tree line. I think they're through. Senjai and Nagi joined him, flanking either side. The defenders of Wave stood in silence, watching the explosions as the last of the forest traps fell. Wordlessly, they all went to their positions. The plan had been finessed for days now. There was nothing for it now but to do their best to carry it out. Naruto, Senjai, and Nagi ran to the bridge. Naruto stepped slightly further ahead, watching as the Konoha forces like dark shadow emerged from the forest. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. His right leg behind him, his left leg pointing forward. His right arm extended behind, palm open. His left arm in the same position, but extended in front. His eyes were closed, breathing slowly. The front lines saw him and paused briefly. Here was one of their prey, but he was just standing there. One of the team leaders who had been burned in Naruto's Kage Bunshin blast trick snarled, infuriated. Kill him! He led the charge of 4 teams, several hundred feet towards Naruto across the bridge, getting within throwing distance of their kunai and jutsus. Naruto opened his eyes and breathed in deep again. He started to draw in the natural chakra, feeling it swelling up inside him. The winds around him began to swirl at his feet. The root team saw Naruto was going to try something, but figured he couldn't take all of them out at once. Naruto brought both hands to his chest, palms facing each other, and rocked back onto his back leg. He paused there for a minute. The wind died down completely, and the world went silent. Naruto felt the strain in the pit of his stomach and the back of his mind. No! I took in too much. The ninja in front stopped in his tracks. No. No, it couldn't be. He felt the silence like an iron cloak on him. He felt the cold shiver down his spine. He knew he was facing it. Death. He would be dead in seconds. He was staring at Naruto, his white suit looking impossibly pristine, and knew that he would not make it off the bridge. He opened his mouth to say something, but never got the chance to finish it. Naruto focused his chakra, and found himself having a hard time concentrating the massive pool of chakra into wind. He strained, sweat forming on his brow. He grunted, then screamed and pushed his palms towards the oncoming forces. A blinding white light erupted from him. An unstoppable force of chakra in the form of a wave of light. Senjai thought it resembled the chakra explosion when he'd almost lost control of the Kyuubi back when they'd found Old Man Tora and his family. The results were similar. The 4 teams of ninja disintegrated before they had a chance to scream. The wave pushed on, past them, damaging the bridge. It tore at the concrete like it was paper, ripping up steel and cables, bending it all like a twisted dance. And almost like the bridge had funneled the attack, it actually lasted longer than it should have, shooting out and destroying everything a half-mile straight out from the bridge. Niji screamed and closed his eyes. He thanked the kami he wasn't looking directly at the burst. For eyes trained to see chakra, that burst would blind most. As it was, he was seeing spots and felt his corneas burning. That must be Naruto, he thought. A different attack to what destroyed the Hokage's tower, but a similar one. When did Naruto become so strong? Tenten surveyed the damages. The 4 teams were gone. Not a shred of clothing nor even blood remained. The road along the bridge was impassable now to anything but agile soldiers. The fact that it was even still standing after that was a testament to how well it had been built, and that it had only taken a glancing blow from Naruto's jutsu. If it had taken the full force, it would have crumpled like the Hokage's tower. And then there was the road leading up to the bridge. For a half-mile out, it looked like a Category 5 tornado had hit, and while those standing in the way hadn't been vaporized like those on the bridge, most were still dead and the rest too injured to fight. The route commander took this all in coldly and with a hand signal ordered 4 more teams across the bridge. Naruto collapsed to one knee, feeling exhausted. Through weary eyes he surveyed the damage he'd done. The plan called for him to do some damage, and he thought he could handle it, but he'd pushed too hard. The stress of the situation getting to him. He'd absorbed natural energy when he really didn't need to and could not control it. Naruto hung his head and felt the waves of exhaustion running through his mind. The pounding in his body. Nagi grabbed Naruto and leapt backwards with him, away from the fight, leaving just Senjai standing there at the base of the bridge. There was no way around the swordsman. The four teams didn't even hesitate, unleashing a barrage of jutsu and projectiles at the swordsman. Senjai knocked every projectile away with his twin kodachi, and took a deep breath. The teams were almost within striking distance now. He sheathed his swords quickly and made a fast hand sign, swapping out for a large block of wood. Too late the attackers saw that the wood was covered in exploding tags and more of those iron pellets. It exploded and shredded them into chunks of flesh and bloody mist. Senjai appeared next to Nagi and helped hold up Naruto, the three of them racing off into the town and their secondary positions. The next wave of attackers made it over the bridge in seconds, flashing quickly to the open area between the bridge and the town. Jiraiya and Tsunade both made their hand signals and called on their biggest summons. Toad Boss Gamabunta and Slug Queen Katsuyu both appeared in a giant cloud of smoke, stopping the Konoha Nin in their tracks. The rest of the Konoha force crossed the bridge in seconds, pouring out of it like ants when their hill is disturbed. So Jiraiya and Lady Tsunade are with Naruto. That explains his surge in strength. Niji thought. He didn't want to go any further, but if he didn't at least appear to want to follow orders, Danzo would have him killed on his return, and Tenten as well. He could, however. Tenten, sigh, he whispered again. Head back to the shoreline. We'll circle around. The Konoha ninja were no brainless mercenaries or fighters. The sight of the giant toad and slug rattled them but did not slow them down. Teams of three jumped forward, leaping to incapacitate the giants. Katsuyu! Shouted Tsunade from atop the giant slug. Yes, Tsunade-sama, Katsuyu replied. The slug swelled for a second, then fired off her special attack, tongue-toothed sticky acid. The acid was known to be able to melt even stone down to nothing. The root Nin in the front bore the full brunt of the attack. 7 out of the 12 attacking ninjas screamed in agony as the acid hit them. They fell to the ground writhing for a few seconds before remaining perfectly still, their bodies melting into the ground. The remaining 5 ninja in the attack on Katsuyu had pulled a kawarami and allowed 5 blocks of wood to be dissolved. They reappeared in the air above Katsuyu, aiming for Tsunade. Even though the slug mistress was well known and feared, the root members followed their orders no matter what. Even a former Hokage was not off limits. Tsunade turned on them angrily. Her mood for the day not getting any better. As she soon demonstrated by grabbing the 2 closest enemies, her immense strength crushing their necks the moment they were in her grasp, and then almost casually threw them in a rising arch back towards Konoha. They actually hit ground on the continent a mile and a half away. Their compatriots impacted moments after them, actually gaining greater distance. 4 more teams lunged at Gamabunta. One team was skilled in fire attacks and were sending fireball after fireball at him. Gamabunta grunted and swung his large tanto. The ninja dodged it, but just barely. Gamabunta moved very quickly for a toad of his size. He leapt into the air and spewed a water attack, washing the offending ninja back into the ocean. The rest of the Konoha force headed straight into the town, bypassing the fight of the behemoths. The root commander noticed immediately that the town was deserted. He signaled for the force to split into teams and hunt. Find Naruto and his friends. Find the escaped prisoners. Kill everyone. Center of town, by the market, Inari was fidgety. He knew this town better than anyone, so he was point person for his team. Jen and Miran were calm next to him. They all wore the training uniforms of Tengaku's academy. White GIs with the Tengaku symbol embroidered into it in gold, a solid iron belt buckle also with the symbol of Tengaku tied it all together. They had all modified them slightly though. Inari had added some leg and arm bracers to his. Genesuk had added a white hood to his. The white strip of cloth covering his sightless eyes had also been embroidered with the Tengaku symbol. Miran had added an inner red top to her GI, and kept that red ribbon in her hair. The necklace she never took off remained visible. Siren's shocking head of blue spiky hair was the first thing anyone saw when they looked at him, but he'd added a few embellishments himself to his clothes. He'd torn the sleeves off his GI and wore iron-spiked gloves with leg bracers. Siren was bursting with energy. I wish they'd hurry up and get here. They'll be here soon enough, Jen said calmly. In fact, I see some ninja on the rooftops 100 yards to our left, and closing. Moving very slowly. Inari glanced at General. His chakra senses were unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Jen could read chakra and use it to see, and see further and clearer than any normal person could. You didn't release any chakra waves, how can you be sure? Are you kidding? That burst that Naruto-sama did a little while ago has the entire island lit up like it's broad daylight. I haven't seen like this in a really long time. I won't need to use my chakra burst for a while yet, Gen replied, with something akin to awe in his voice. Is Naruto alright? Inari asked worriedly. He viewed Naruto as his de facto big brother, and was worried about him. He'd looked so tired earlier. Gen nodded. He's still leaking some chakra, but he's in the secondary position. No one's anywhere near him. Let's go get those guys on the roof. How many? Siren asked. 3. Coming towards us, the others broke off towards those mercenaries. Gen replied. Inari nodded. Right. Miran was Siren on this one. Gen and I will watch your back. The 4 of them leapt onto the rooftop. Straight ahead in the dusk were 3 silhouettes. Charging straight in was not something that most ninja were trained to do, better to attack from hiding places. But Miran and Siren were better at direct attacks. The 2 academy students sprinted towards the 3 IWA soldiers soundlessly. The adult ninja prepared to cut down the children who were charging straight at them. Things, however, did not go as the attackers thought they would. Siren became a ball of solid water, hitting the first man in the chest. The ninja's sword cutting through the water harmlessly. As the man fell back, Siren solidified, holding onto the man's shirt, his legs brought up to his chest. Siren pushed backwards and kicked forward, sending the ninja flying straight down through the concrete roof. The IWA nin who was going to cut Miran in half saw a glimpse of her golden eyes and froze. Where did she go? He felt something below him and looked down in time to see her fist connect with his groin. Miran, Gen and Siren grew up on the streets. Dirty street fighting was something they learned in order to survive as best they could. The soldier doubled over, but Miran wasn't finished. She grabbed his collar and jumped straight up, ending in a handstand over the ninja's head. He looked up in horror as she twisted his neck, and came down behind him, bringing her knees into his back, folding him like a rag doll. Inari smiled. Miran had a dijitsu that allowed anyone catching her eyesight to lose a few seconds of time. That guy had never stood a chance. The 3rd man, however, was bringing his sword to bear on Miran. Both Gen and Inari fired off their weapons at the same time. Gen carried a brace of throwing knives. Tiny things, but with his deadly accuracy they were lethal. Inari opted for a pair of mini crossbows like Calamity on Sakura's team used. He'd always had an affinity for the crossbow as a weapon. His bolt and Gen's knife hit at the same time. The ninja died with a gurgle, the 2 weapons glinting silver and red in his throat. Okay, position 2, follow me, Inari said, leading them off that roof to another. Ready? Senji asked. Want to make it interesting? Nagi asked. They emerged from their hiding place at the very start of the town. The main Konoha force had passed them, so it was time for the second stage of Jiraiya's plan to go into effect. Naruto had split off from them. His part in the plan was coming later. How much? Senji grinned. Loser cooks on the journey home. Every day. Nagi cracked his neck. Deal. You're going to be sorry you brought this on yourself. Senji laughed. He hated cooking. Highest body count wins. Senji pulled an exploding tag out of his shirt and threw it high into the air. It exploded in a shower of sparks. They raced into town, behind the Konoha forces. At the same time, on the other side of town, the 3 mercenaries Takada, Masahiro and Nizurai saw the signal and leapt forward. Jiraiya's plan was simple. Lure the main forces into the town. The defenders would pick off who they could, but when they saw the signal, get to the north and south edges of the town to prevent anyone from escaping. The 2 teams on either side would then move in and attack both in front and behind. If the Konoha ninja were able to withstand that, they'd then face the attacks from both north and south as those teams move in. It turned the entire city into an ambush site. Senji drew his twin Kodachi and lunged forward. 2 teams of Konoha attackers were right in front of them. The dimming evening light was perfect for an ambush as a person's eyes had to adjust. He slashed through the 3 closest to him, flipping in midair and landing on top of another, driving him into the ground, cracking his spine. 4, he counted out loud. 5, 6, 10, he continued as he cut down 2 more and then tore through another 4 with a single stroke. Nagi swung his arms left then right, turning his whole body into a classic capoeira kick. His foot finding a ninja's face. He spun again, and this time the ninja went flying, spinning until he landed in a heap. Another ninja rushed him, but Nagi spun his lower leg forward around, swiping at the attacker's legs. The attacker stopped and raised his forward leg, avoiding the swipe. Nagi then stopped the same leg that was swiping in mid-kick and went up on his arms in a crescent kick to the man's head. The ninja had some skill and blocked it, but Nagi bent the leg, allowing it to pass by the man. Both legs touched down and he backflipped, clipping the ninja in the face. 7, 8, 9, he counted out loud in time with the rhythm of his movements. Nagi grinned and melted into the long shadows on the ground. It was dark now, and everywhere was in shadow. His next spinning kick came from out of the ground, impossible to predict. The rude nin's head snapped back and he crumpled in a heap. Another ninja jumped in, but Nagi jumped at him, and they both went falling back into the shadows. Only Nagi appeared, attacking another ninja. Senjai saw that and shivered despite himself. Nagi's ability to carry people into the shadows and leave them there was downright unsettling. Nagi explained that once he let go of someone in the shadow world, they became a shadow themselves. It was instant death. 13. Nagi called out after he reappeared. Senjai surged forward, determined not to lose. The three mercenaries lunged straight ahead. Not many Konoha forces had made it this far ahead, but some had. At least 5 teams of 3 rushed to meet them. Takada? Masahuri asked a silent question as he started to focus chakra. High likelihood that if you break left you'll survive. Avoid the third one from the right's reach. The way he wears his suit implies a touch-based skill. Mizurai, if you can use your jutsu in exactly 2 minutes and 12 seconds you'll save our lives. I'll recalculate after they split up. Masahiro nodded. Takada had a skill that was most useful in a fight. He could see probabilities. All outcomes based on moves. So what lines or moves a person or group would do based on movements. They had worked together for many years now, and it never ceased to amaze Masahuri how accurate he was. Masahiro let the chakra flow from his mind into his arms, extending the long blades from his arm braces. The blades were chakra-infused and could cut through anything. The diminutive man lurched forward and cut a swath through the oncoming forces. Takada drew his weapon, the gigantic meat cleaver that Jiraiya had seen earlier. It was a fearsome weapon that looked far too heavy for him to wield. But even at a thin 6 feet tall, Takada was sinewy muscle and with ease turned the blade outwards. The rushing ninja tried to dodge it, but Takada stopped the cleaver in mid-swing and rotated the handle in his palm, slicing the man's back open. Takada saw that dodge coming. Your friends will jump and come in low. Takada will slice the one in the air and cue ball will distract the ground attack. Did you call me cue ball again, Baka? Masahiro shouted at him while slicing through a ninja's sword like it was butter. The fallen ninja fell into the path of the ground attacker. Takada met the air attack and parried his blade, knocking the ninja aside with his fist. He turned to see how Mizurai was doing and saw him forming water balls and firing them at the oncoming ninja. Each one hit like a rock, guided to their target by chakra. Mizurai's short red hair was standing out starkly in the dusk light. The mercenaries were holding their own against the attackers, but there were too many of them. More and more poured into the street where they were fighting. Takada showed an uncanny ability to dodge and predict attacks, and Masahiro's blades were nigh on unstoppable. But sheer numbers threatened to weigh them down. Mizurai finished the count in his mind. Exactly 2 minutes and 12 seconds. He quickly went through a complicated series of hand seals, finishing with a shout. Water octopus carousel. The moisture in the air was plentiful enough to respond to his jutsu, forming a giant water octopus. Each tentacle rushing out, away from the center. Masahiro and Takada found themselves right next to Mizurai just as the octopus began to spin. With immense force, the water beast's tentacles lashed out in a violent spinning motion. Everybody in a 50-yard radius was slammed away by the impact. Takada? Masahuri shouted above the din. We must leave now. 100% probability we will not survive the next attack. Wait. He turned and lunged for Mizurai, pushing him out of the way as a battle axe tore through the spot he was just standing. The soldier who had thrown it scowled in frustration at having missed. Masahiro, sweating profusely, managed to detract one of his blades and threw a shuriken attached to an exploding note high into the air. Okay, time to move. Secondaries. The 3 of them vanished into a side alley and disappeared. There it is. Mabry pointed as the wind stream carried them towards the town by the bridge in Wave Country. The battle seemed to be raging relentlessly. It had been a long time since Mabry had seen something like this. Not since his youth. Let's do it, Tenchi said. He held aloft his Naginata and pushed against the wind stream with a small chi attack. It was enough to break the stream temporarily and drop them all a mile above the battle. Guerrera did a few hand seals and doubled in size, hardening until his skin resembled rock more than flesh. He fell like a cannonball into the middle of a street, exploding in a cloud of dust. He clambered out of the hole looking for his first battle in almost a year. Tenchi aimed for a slanted rooftop. He plummeted towards it, but hit it at a roll. He rolled twice, 3 times, then came up in a run. He ran off the building and jumped to another roof slightly lower. He was immediately accosted by 7 IWA soldiers, all of whom fell to his blade. Mabry was not known as the greatest magician in the world for nothing, even if that title was self-bestowed. He threw a small samban attached to nearly invisible steel wire into the wall of a bell tower. He attached the wire to his belt and swung in a circular motion to break his descent. He landed attached to the wall and grinned, disappearing in a puff of smoke. Old Man Tora held onto a large piece of heaven stone he'd gotten from Yoshi. With a few hand seals he performed his bloodline's trademark jutsu, transforming an inanimate object into a living creature. The 50-pound block became a 50-pound eagle, just large enough to carry the diminutive old man on its back, flying him safely to the ground. Yoshi fell with an umbrella attached to his back. It was not just any umbrella, it was a giant red umbrella. As he floated to earth, he saw the remains of his Daedalus machine in the water by the bridge. My Daedalus! What have they done to you? He was completely oblivious to the soldiers waiting for him to land, the giant red umbrella attracting a lot of attention. Guerrera had landed close by though, and the masked giant wrestler collided into the group, sending them clattering into the dust. Yoshi landed and didn't even look at the soldiers, instead running across to the water's edge, looking longingly at his ruined winged device. An Iwanin rushed him from the side. He glanced at him and dodged the swing of the soldier's blade. With a quick swivel he pushed the blade into the ground with one foot, and kicked the man in his face with the other. Yoshi's eyes blazed. He saw another Iwanin and jumped at him. He landed on one leg, and turned 180 degrees, smashing his free foot into the soldier's temple. Inari and Gen took on 2 tough-looking soldiers. Inari used a combination of taijutsu and some underhanded tricks he had picked up from his street-fighting friends. He ran right at the ninja, but dropped to his knees at the last minute, skidding underneath his legs. He slashed at the man's ankle as he passed, felling him. He turned, but before he could do more the man smashed his fist into Inari's temple, sending him careening across the rooftop. Gen used a pair of eskrima sticks as his melee weapons. He swiveled at the waist in a complete circle, dodging the ninja's attack, then lashed out with one of his sticks with a quick flick. The ninja blocked with a single butterfly sword, slashing with the other. Gen ducked under the attack, flipping completely, coming at the ninja's head with a crescent kick. The ninja blocked it with his upper arm, then stabbed forward, but Gen had already landed and sidestepped. He swept for the ninja's feet, but the ninja somersaulted over his swipe. Gen hit the ground with both his eskrima sticks, then looked at the ninja disconcertingly through his cloth-covered eyes. With a flurry of attacks he lunged at the man, forcing him into defense, backing him up. The ninja misstepped suddenly and cursing fell off the roof. Siren and Miran were rushing in to help Inari but would never get there in time. A sudden sense of something moving and Master Tenchi was standing there, his Naginata sticking through the Iwanin attacking Inari. He turned to his pupils. Good job so far. Gen turned towards the others. Something is going on. All the chakra in the area is being sucked up. Tenchi nodded and motioned for them to follow him, starting to run towards the next rooftop. The others followed, Inari asking Gen, What? What do you mean? I mean all the residue, all the chakra that Naruto-sama had released and was leaking, is going back the way it came. It's all being sucked back into Naruto-sama, Gen said with concern in his voice. So what? Siren asked. He's supposed to be executing his part of the plan about now. If you could see what I see, it looks like a storm. A storm, and Naruto-sama is the center of it. On the other side of town, Senjai and Nagi were making their way through the attackers. They had gotten bogged down in the battle as well, sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm them. Damn it! Senjai exclaimed. A lucky kunai had nicked his face, sending blood trickling down his forehead. Nagi as well was having difficulties. Every ninja he attacked was instantly defended by many more. He had resorted to mostly shadow attacks, and he couldn't keep that up for very long. His chakra reserves were already low. He could feel the exhaustion coming on. I think this is the best we can do, Senji said, blocking a furious attack from 2 IWA soldiers, the sound of the blades clanging in the now rising moonlight. Agreed, Nagi said, disappearing into the shadows. He reappeared a second later in a flying cartwheel kick that broke a man's collarbone. Time to move! He threw a shuriken with an attached exploding note high into the air, then dove for Senji. Senji grunted and closed his eyes tightly. God, Nagi, just don't let me go in there. Nagi grabbed him about the waist and they fell backwards into the shadows, disappearing. Naruto, you know you're tired, the voice said. No, Naruto replied weakly. He'd pushed himself too far, he thought. He could barely stand. All the chakra he had expended over the past week. Those Hiraishin jumps, the wind push against the Hokage's tower. The blast on the bridge. Naruto felt empty. I can help. I can lend you some power. Just let some seep through. Loosen the seal just enough. Your friends are out there. Dying for you. Can't you feel it? The hopelessness? I can't feel them. Naruto had started to be able to feel people while in Tengaku. The chakra-laced wind had helped him hone in on that skill. Since then he'd felt something. A small tug at the back of his mind. A knowledge of his friend's existence, maybe. He couldn't explain it. But right now, all he felt was so tired. Yes, Naruto. I know. But my strength will be your strength. How long has it been since you felt my power? The power that you shun. Let me show you what I could do for you. No! He shouted, snapping his eyes fully open. I don't need your power. Naruto started pulling in chakra from his surroundings, drawing in the natural energy like Pa and Ma Toad had taught him. Fool! Not now! You are too weak to handle Gaia's force. You will kill us both. Naruto ignored the voice, pushing on, drawing in all he could, to strengthen himself. I can do this. I can protect my friends. The clouds above the town began to swirl. Slowly at first, but then rapidly. Pulling in moisture and filling the night sky. The unnatural movement causing the air to mix and spin, forming massive lightning storms above, illuminating the city. The battles began to slow down and ninja and defenders alike looked to the sky as it swirled. Jiraiya, Gamabunta said, looking up at the sky. This is not good. That's natural energy. That could only mean one thing. It's Naruto. He's drawing in too much power. He'll level the city at this rate. Katsuyu, take me to Naruto! Tsunade shouted, at the same time that Jiraiya asked Gamabunta to do the same. Hi Tsunade-sama! Gamabunta leapt high into the air, his dark shadow eclipsing the battles between the forces of Tengaku and Konoha. Katsuyu moved with a rapid speed that belied her size, zooming down the main street of the town. Jiraiya and his toad arrived first, landing safely on the other side, while Katsuyu was still making her way. She ran over and slimed many soldiers who did not get out of the way fast enough. Jiraiya dismounted, running for the small grove. They told Naruto to rest and wait until he was needed again. Tsunade was not far behind him, having leapt off Katsuyu as soon as she broke past the edge of town. As they broke into the clearing, they saw Naruto kneeling, eyes illuminated by light, absorbing what looked like a tornado of chakra. Naruto! Stop! Tsunade shouted over the gale force winds around the teenager. Jiraiya grimly raced in and clocked Naruto on the side of his head, knocking him down. Naruto lay there as the gale force winds died down. The sky began to clear again. Ow! Naruto said, sitting up. That hurt. It was supposed to baka. Jiraiya said, clouding him behind his head. What the hell were you doing? Naruto yawned. I was tired. Chakra levels were low, so I figured I'd top up with natural energy. Better than the alternative, I figured. Alternative? Jiraiya asked. Naruto pointed sheepishly at his stomach where Jiraiya knew the curse seal lay. You cannot handle that much natural energy. Don't ever try that again. You could have burst, become an explosion of energy. Your body itself converted into chakra. Jiraiya shouted at him. Naruto sat there wide-eyed. Oh. I didn't know that. He rubbed the back of his head. I feel great now, though. How's the battle coming? Jiraiya and Tsunade looked towards the town and saw the remains of the two flares still drifting back down to earth. Not good, I'd say, Tsunade said. But reinforcements have arrived from Tengaku. Well, let's even the odds just a little bit more. Naruto jumped to his feet and used his favorite technique. Tajukage Bunshin no Jutsu. Masahiro fell backwards. He'd met another chakra weapon user, and they'd so far been an even match. But the ninjas were not playing fair, and it was not a one-on-one match. Two other chakra weapon users had joined the fight. He'd so far managed to avoid a fatal wound, but he was bleeding a good bit. Takada had cut large swathes out of the forces, but they were being overwhelmed. He had a hard time predicting moves with this many factors in the battle, plus fighting at the same time. Even he had been hard-pressed, and suffered at least one very bad gash on his leg. Mizurai lay in a pool of blood, either one of his friends daring to look too closely. They'd have to check on him after the battle was over. If the tide doesn't turn, I'm afraid Takada's love interest waits for a warrior that will never return home, he whispered to himself. Suddenly a sea of white appeared down the street. It looked like a wave of water, but after a second they all realized it was 1,000 Naruto clones, all in white, running full speed. The main reason Danzo had sent so many soldiers after Naruto was this ability. He had demonstrated when he destroyed the Hokage's tower that he could create great numbers of shadow clones. But the Konoha forces were now spread all over the city, and been cut down immensely in numbers by the spirited defense they had met. The soldiers were not dumb. They realized very quickly that the tide had turned. Those that were able to, disappeared, fleeing the city to regroup. The Naruto clones stormed over every part of the town like a solid blanket. Some ninja chose to fight, and were quickly taken care of by the sheer volume of Naruto clones. It took a few minutes, but Naruto's clones covered every inch of the city looking for more ninja. He was cheered on by the weary defenders, Senjia Inagi, Mizurai, Masahiro, Takada, Tenchi, Mabry, Old Man Tora, Ainari, Genosuke, Miran, Sirin, and even Yoshi. When every last remaining Konoha ninja had left the city, the clones stood at the end of the bridge, on the side of the city, daring them to come back. Niji and Tenten emerged from their hiding space inside an empty store. Niji saw what was going on, and couldn't believe how many clones Naruto had managed to create. Good solid ones too. He quickly formulated a plan in his head. Sai, check the windows. As the Root Nin turned to look out the window, Niji hit a pressure point behind his head, sending the boy into unconsciousness. Tenten nodded in approval. She flung the door open and shouted at a group of clones nearby. Hey Naruto! The clones looked over in shock. Tenten? We need a way to stop them from coming back over the bridge. Tsunade lamented. This is a stalemate. She tended to the wounds of the defenders. Most everyone had been damaged in some way or another. Shizun and the building that Enko was resting in had remained unscathed. It was on the outskirts of town, and as such the attackers had not taken much interest in it, deserted as it looked. Hey, what ship is that? Inari asked no one in particular. There was a very large, very fast ship approaching from around the side of the island, but it didn't seem to be heading for the dock. As they watched, the ship turned and its cannons fired a volley. Are they firing on the Konoha forces? Calamity asked. The first few shots missed, and Jiraiya saw what they were planning. No. They're not. The next volley hit. The great Naruto bridge crumbled like dust under the heavy cannon fire. They fired volley after volley, to the cheers of the people on the ship. What the hell are they thinking? Tsunade asked dumbfounded. Wave Country needs that bridge in one piece. That bridge is their livelihood. Jiraiya nodded but noticed it was successful. Naruto voiced what they were all thinking. With the bridge gone, they can't attack, can they? Well, no. Not until they get some boats. Jiraiya admitted. The large ship turned and was coming back to dock. Within minutes it had tied off to the dock, and a giant plank extended. They all gathered by the docks to find Kakashi, Sakura, Calamity, Haruka and Lee standing there grinning. Accompanying them was a very fat man who looked like royalty, and Lord Gamma. Sorry we're late for the party, Kakashi said with a smile hidden beneath his mask. It was hours later that they all understood what had happened. So I signed the agreement immediately with the Lord Gamma, and we have an accord. The Wave Country is now partnered with the Crescent Moon Kingdom. As such, new trade lanes will be established. Konoha may own the land on this side of the continent, but for all intents and purposes we own the seas. We will send a notice of the partnership to Danzo and cut off the ocean to him if he doesn't respect our territory. Fire country depends on much from the sea," Prince Michiru said proudly. "What if Danzo attacks you?" Naruto blurted out, incredulous. This prince was a great man. He thought to himself. Lord Gamma as well. They'd worked out a way to no longer need the bridge access to the mainland. Prince Michiru shrugged. I doubt he would. This campaign must have cost him too much already. Politically, my kingdom is aligned with all the countries to the north and island states. He cannot afford to make enemies of all of us. A few months' embargo would drive that point home. Lord Gamma winked at Naruto. Also, the criminal Naruto he was chasing would no longer be in our territory, but we will inform him that we are keeping a very sharp eye out for his return. He is wanted for property damage and endangering the life of our citizens. Jiraiya smiled. He glanced at the far bank and saw that a few Konoha soldiers still stood there. Probably posted as guards until they get further orders from Danzo. This would effectively block off this part of the world from Danzo's ambitions. For now. Guerrera, Tenchi and Mabry were making a sweep of the town, looking for any stragglers that Naruto's clones may have missed. Yoshi was working on something or the other on the edge of the group. Old Man Tora had created a few small eagles from stones and sent them to spy on the Konoha forces. Amazingly, the eagle he'd made from Heaven Stone on his initial descent was still around and not looking like it was going to fade anytime soon. He just blamed it on the material and sent it to scout the perimeter of the island. Of the 15 guards Lord Gamma had provided, only 4 remained alive. The Dreamwalker had been ordered to stay out of the battle, and the others had fared badly against the massive attack. The one who could take on the appearance of anyone had been sequestered away by Jiraiya. The spy master had a very interesting plan forming, and he wanted someone with that skill. A skill greater than a simple henge. You realize all of this is a temporary measure. Eventually he will have the forces he needs to take what he wants without caring about the politics of it all. Jiraiya said. The mayor nodded. We are with immediate effect creating a protection force for our trade route. With funding from the Crescent Moon Kingdom we will hire the best fighters we can find to train some of us. Many in the city were upset that they could not help today. We will learn how to defend ourselves. Takada grinned and raised his hand from the stretcher he was laid out on. Takada sees a way to become wealthy without traveling too far. Masahiro's head snapped up. He opened his mouth to argue but just shook his head. Fine, we'll stay here. But only as long as we're paid up. Mizurai, the last of the mercenary trio, smiled widely. His wounds had proven to be less than fatal. Tsunade had earned her reputation as a medic. Perfect. I would not mind settling down here for a while. That cute barmaid might favor a man who defended her hometown. Naruto looked from one to the other and smiled widely. The prince looked at Naruto. He had heard about him, the founder of Tengaku, from the girls. He'd also heard all the stories from his retainers. He looked like an impressive young man. Naruto. The Crescent Moon Kingdom is officially aligned with the hidden village of Tengaku. As such we defer to you in areas of defense. Naruto stood in shock. Well, the plan seems okay. Maybe we can send Tenchi over as well from time to time to check on progress. Tenchi nodded his acceptance of that idea. Niji cleared his throat. If I may interject. A few Naruto clones as well as Mabry were escorting him and Tenten. A few others had an unconscious sigh being carried over their heads. Eyes narrowed and weapons drew as they saw the Konoha headbands. Niji raised his hands as did Tenten. Naruto and Sakura were surprised to see them, but not as surprised as Lee was. Teammates. Niji. Tenten. He raced over and squeezed them tightly. The defenders relaxed slightly. Oof. Lee? Tenten said. What the hell are you doing in the middle of this? You're supposed to be training off in Sunagekyo with Gai-sensei. Sensei ordered me to train while on this mission with Kakashi-sensei and Sakura-chan. Calamity and Hiroka were a little indignant to be left out of Lee's explanation, but stayed quiet nonetheless. What are you doing here? Sakura asked, happy to see a familiar face, but a little apprehensive given the circumstances. I don't know if Naruto clued you in, but there's an underground movement against Danzo in Konoha. Naruto shook his head. I didn't have a chance. Shikamaru is leading it, he said, turning to Sakura. Yes, and Danzo has some idea of its existence. He also suspects the Hyuga house of plotting against him. I surmise he sent me on this mission as a test of our allegiance, Niji said plainly. What are you proposing? Jiraiya chimed in. Clearly this boy had thought things out a bit. I will ask that you wound us, not severely please, and bind us along with Sai. He is a root member, but an odd one. Allow us to escape when he awakens and we will flee, perhaps after Sai witnesses Tenten stab a Naruto clone. Something that will give Danzo some reason to stop the attack for now. Jiraiya nodded. Not a bad plan, but I can improve on it. Sai opened his eyes groggily. Within seconds he took stock of his situation. Tied to a chair. His face felt sore. He'd been beaten. He looked left. Niji as well. He saw blood trickling down his teammate's unconscious face. His left arm had a kunai embedded in it still. He looked right. Tenten was also tied, but she was awake. Her face too was bloody. One eye was sealed shut. Sai thought back. They must have ambushed us, the Naruto clones. He realized they had no guards, but he could hear voices in the other room. He took a deep breath, and with a quiet grunt dislocated his shoulder. He slipped out of the ropes. He pulled the kunai out of Niji's arm. Niji's eyes snapped open, but Sai covered his mouth with his hand. Sure. I will cut you free, Sai whispered. He sliced through Niji's ropes, and then Tenten's. Tenten almost fell into Sai's arms. She is hurt badly, he said matter-of-factly to Niji. Niji nodded. You are the most able. Carry her, I will lead. Niji grabbed another kunai that was on a table next to the door. He eased it open and Sai could see Naruto talking to Irika, who was being bandaged by a young girl. Niji took a breath and leapt into the room. He sliced Irika's throat, a spurt of blood gushing everywhere. Naruto rushed in, about to make the seal for a shadow clone when Niji kicked him in the face. He slid across the floor. Sai propped up Tenten. He wanted to join the fight, but Tenten was holding on to him tightly. Naruto got back to his feet and Niji threw his kunai. It flew straight and true. It hit Naruto in the stomach. He doubled over. The girl in the room screamed helplessly. Niji turned to Sai. Let's go. Quick. Help will be coming. The trio leapt out the back door. They realized they were near to the water. They could hear curses as people found Naruto and Irika. With a glance they all jumped into the icy night water. It was maybe a mile swim to the other side, but hopefully they could make it in their condition. Tsunade watched them go before releasing the genjutsu. Years of practice had made her rather skilled at illusions. Most people couldn't even see through the one she kept on herself to make her seem young. Naruto held up the stick Niji had thrown at him. Boy, he doesn't play around. That kick in the face was real enough. Let's hope Niji's plan works to ingratiate himself with Danzo, Jiraiya said. It's a bold plan. Let's pray first that they can swim to the far shore. It's freezing, Mabry said wryly. Right, Naruto said. Now how do we go home? Chapter 23, Alliances. 1 week after the Konoha attack. Are you sure this will work? Tsunade looked doubtfully at the seal on her palm. A glance around the room they were in showed that everyone else was having a similarly hard time believing the words of the seal master. Jiraiya looked stricken. You doubt me? I who taught the fourth. I who once created a seal on a pair of eyeglasses that allowed its wearer to see through walls for 5 hours? Tsunade chortled. Those glasses caused 5 days of blindness after. And you only ever used it on the bathhouse. Jiraiya grinned. Ah, good times. He cleared his throat with a blush. Anyway, this works on the same principle as an animal summons. These are temporary contracts each of us has signed with Naruto. He can now summon us to his location, at which point the seal wears off. Perfectly harmless. But I'm right here, Naruto chimed in, confused. Up his left and right arm were seals written in a small amount of blood and ink. Each person in the room had sacrificed the drops of blood for Jiraiya's plan. It had taken him an hour to draw the blood and write up the symbols, a unique one for each user. Yes, Jiraiya confirmed testily. You are here right now. But you won't be for long. But how? Naruto said, exasperated. Naruto, summons can summon their summoner, Jiraiya said, not for the first time. Naruto screwed up his face at his teacher, sticking out his tongue. So the messenger I sent a few hours ago to Pa Toad should have delivered the message already. He's in Tengaku. He will summon Naruto, and then you, Naruto, will summon us. One at a time. Got it? Naruto sighed. Yes, I think so. Jiraiya nodded and glanced at the clock. You should be summoned in the next 10 minutes or so. Naruto looked at his friends in the room. Senjai and Nagi were leaning against the wall on the far side, playing a card game with Tsunade and Shizen. Judging from the smiles on his teammates' faces, and the scowl on Tsunade's, he could tell who was winning. Old man Tora was fast asleep in a chair, his snores blending into the background noise. Tenchi, Mabry and Guerrero were going over some plans they had for the ninja academy they were helping the Lord of Wave Country with. It had already been decided that they would take turns checking up on the school. The 3 vagabond warriors that had helped in the fight against Konoha had proven to be skilled enough to be assets to the school. They were happy to stay and teach, and defend Wave if they had to. Mostly because of the money that now seemed to be no object since Wave had joined with the Crescent Moon Kingdom. Naruto suspected it was also because they were good people, very deep down. He grinned, thinking about the rapport of the 3 warriors, deciding he will miss them. Yoshi had fixed his Daedalus flying machine and insisted he fly it back to Tengaku. He replaced the soluble glue with a waterproof one he had gotten from Wave, and repaired it almost perfectly, with some extra features. I'm adding a chair on top of the Daedalus. It's just crazy to hang from it by your hands. That would be pure lunacy, he had said. Tsunade, who remembered hanging from the wings as indeed pure lunacy, had chased Yoshi right around the village. Yoshi had figured that if he ran the Daedalus off a cliff, he'd get enough wind beneath the wings for a flight. Tsunade had grinned and encouraged him to do just that. She had seemed disappointed when it worked though, Naruto thought. Yoshi had left yesterday, bound for home. Inari stood off to the side with his grandfather and mother. Tazuna was staying behind to build up the Wave's defenses. However, his mother was coming along. She did not want her son living on his own, and had been pretty upset with Tazuna when he had returned without Inari. Tazuna joked he'd rather face another attack from the entire armed forces out of Konoha than face tsunami again. Jen, Miron and Sirin all talked animatedly amongst themselves, still reliving the battle from a few days earlier. Sakura, Calamity and Hiroka were talking to Kakashi about increasing their training regimen as soon as they got back home. Naruto was thrilled everyone had survived, relatively unscathed. Lee stood off to the side just smiling at everyone. He wasn't coming with them to Tengaku. After they left he was setting out for Sunagakure. His sensei would meet him there eventually. Lee would have liked to go with Naruto, but he recognized the need for him in Konoha. If there was any way he could assist in the underground fight against Danzo he would. He swore a personal oath to it. Anko was still unconscious in a stretcher next to Tsunade. Both she and Shizen kept a sharp eye on her. It was safe enough to move her now, Tsunade had declared, but she still hadn't woken up yet. The scars on her body seemed a little lighter to Naruto, but he tried not to look too much. Iruka sat next to her in silence, a sad expression on his face, his hand holding hers. He looked up at Naruto, and he barely recognized the young ninja who once was the dead last. Iruka intended to come with them as well, until he could figure out what to do about Danzo. For some reason though, he felt part of that would have to do with Naruto. You know, Jiraiya, when we get back, I have a seal I'd like you to start thinking of, Naruto said with a grin. What's that? Jiraiya responded, distractedly, watching the clock tick. Something to keep these white clothes clean. White gets pretty damn dirty in a battle, Naruto said with a smile. Jiraiya turned and laughed. There's one already, though it's not used much. Sometimes it's good to be able to get dirty, helps you blend into the environment if you need to get covered in mud. You never know. Naruto grinned back. Okay, so maybe something we can activate when needed to clean the clothes. Jiraiya nodded. Sure, there's that. We'll see. Naruto opened his mouth to ask something else, but he popped away in a cloud of smoke as he opened his mouth. Naruto looked around incredulously. Where before he was in a room with Jiraiya and his friends, he now stood in the middle of a seal on the ground and Pa and Ma Toad staring at him through the smoke his transportation had generated. Hey Naruto, Pa grunted at him. You've been gone far longer than you were supposed to. Leave him alone, Pa, Ma said. He's still alive, that's gotta count for something. Humph. Pa grunted and hopped off. Training starts back tomorrow, Naruto, he said as he disappeared around a corner. Naruto smiled at Ma and shrugged. Thanks, Ma. Things just sorta happened. That's okay, Naruto, just summon everyone else back now, she replied. Naruto nodded and tried to remember what Jiraiya said. He drew his blood and focused on the images of his friends. Focusing as much chakra as he could towards it, he slammed his palm down into the ground. With a cacophony of noise and a massive puff of smoke, the space they were in was suddenly crowded. "What the hell?" Tsunade shouted, holding her hands over her ears. "That was loud." The others likewise were wincing. Jiraiya glanced at Naruto. "I didn't expect you to summon us all at once. The noise from all that summoning was deafening," he said disdainfully. Naruto frowned. "Well, at least it worked. That means we don't have to trek for days and weeks to get back home once we go out." Jiraiya nodded. "Yeah, I'll work on a more permanent seal." He headed down the street towards the village bar. "But first, I'm parched." The others likewise scattered, glad to be back home. Tsunade and Shizen watched carefully as Guerrera and Irika lifted the stretcher Anko was laying on and walked slowly and steadily to the hospital. As Guerrera was walking, an elderly woman from the village met him, holding his daughter Gabrielle in her arms. He smiled at his daughter, who cooed back at him. Sakura and the rest of the Tennin squad each headed back to their homes, looking for a change of clothes and a bath. Tenchi and Old Man Tora walked across to the academy, laughing quietly to themselves about something that escaped Naruto. Mabry headed over to the orphanage, his arms full of slips of paper. He had secured a good bit of trading deals that he would work out with the traders in Tengaku. Naruto didn't see where Kakashi disappeared to. Senjai and Nagi fell in with Naruto as they walked into the White Tower. Naruto looked back over the village from the top of the steps. It really bustled with people. He saw Ollie coming towards the tower from his guild house. Naruto waited for him, taking in the view. The academy building looked almost complete, as was the hospital. A few of his clones still moved around, but not as many as he had left behind. It had been a few weeks since he left, so that was to be expected, he supposed. In the field behind the academy, students were going through the chambers Old Man Tora and Sensei Tenchi had created. Idly Naruto wondered who was overseeing their training. "Naruto!" Ollie called out. "It is good to see you back." "Nice to see you too, Ollie." Naruto smiled and waved. "Have Ravi and Rashid arrived as yet?" Ollie shook his head. "No, they're still a week away. I've gotten word from them though." "I don't suppose you can summon them here like you just did everyone else?" Naruto frowned. "I don't think so. Jiraiya had to do a complicated blood seal for it to work." Ollie shrugged. "That's okay. They'll get here soon. They're trustworthy, as far as thieves go." He grinned. "And I feel sorry for anyone who tries to waylay them on their journey." His smile, however, quickly turned into a frown and a flash of anger crossed his face. "However, on another matter. I do not appreciate being left here to babysit while everyone else runs off to battle. Think you that the Spirit Wolf clan has no honor? Are we not warriors? Or do you see us as nursemaids fit only for taking care of the children?" Naruto held up his hands, now understanding what Tenchi and Old Man Tora were laughing about. "Hey, I had nothing to do with that. I suppose someone had to stay behind though, right?" Naruto thought quickly, looking at Senjai and Nagi for help, both of whom seemed fully intent on pretending to ignore the conversation. "Besides, I trust you and your clan, otherwise I wouldn't leave my village in your hands while I'm gone. That's got to count for something, right?" With a scowl, Ollie stomped off to find Tenchi. Naruto turned sheepishly to go further into the tower. "Tenchi!" Ali's voice bellowed from the road outside the academy. "I have a score to settle with you." He burst through the doors, looking for his prey, his eyes alight with an inner fire. Old Man Tora nodded his head towards the back training field. Ali blew past him like a thunderstorm, not even sparing the chuckling old clan leader a glance. Tenchi was waiting for him, still smiling. "You!" Ali accosted him. "You left me here like a wet nurse. As if the Spirit Wolf clan are nothing but women." "I'd not let Tsunade hear you say something like that," Tenchi smirked. "She wouldn't take kindly to it." Ali paled slightly for a moment, and then refocused. "I demand my right for retribution, for the honor of the Spirit Wolf clan." Tenchi nodded, tightening the grip on his sword. "First blood?" Ali drew his Urumi, agreed. No students were supposed to be around, all having been sent off to run the chambers again. Of course, children being children, they seemed to smell the impending fight, and soon a small crowd of academy students were peeking over bushes and stone walls at the fight. Ali struck first, his Urumi lashing out with the speed of a whip towards the left side of Tenchi. Tenchi drew his sword and raised his scabbard at the same time, fast enough to block the attack, the tip of his sword remaining in the case. He knew that he could not hold back in a fight such as this. While not quite a duel to the death, people had been known to die from this sort of blood-draw fight. There were no rules on how much blood could be drawn. Ali pressed his attack, pivoting while swinging the sword around his hips, passing it from hand to hand, the tornado of slashes a lethal attack to any lesser swordsman. Tenchi parried and stepped back. He crouched and drew his sword, slashing to the right of Ali's midsection. His slash missed though because Ali was rolling under it neatly. Tenchi dove over him, knowing that the Wolf Spirit clan leader would raise from the roll in a slash designed to spill his intestines on the floor. Tenchi slashed downwards as he spun. This attack meant to lay open an opponent's spine, crippling them. He would never use it against someone he didn't intend to kill, or against someone he knew wouldn't block it. Ali blocked it easily, his Yurumi slashing over his body while he sprung to his feet. Both men stood facing each other, feeling the warmth of blood rushing through their veins. This was the fight they had hoped for in the exhibition match. An all-out Blade Master battle. Ali allowed himself a smile, his anger dissipating, replaced instead by the thrill of battle. Tenchi struck first this time, his sword slashing diagonally up and to the right, then down, then diagonally up to the left. The criss-cross pattern missing over and over again as Ali alternately twisted his body to avoid it, bent and spun around it, then knocked aside Tenchi's sword with the flat side of his Yurumi. Tenchi stepped back and sheathed his sword quickly. His leg muscles contracted tightly, his center of gravity shifting forward. Ali recognized it instantly. It was the Batajutsu Tenchi had used before in their demonstration fight. Tenchi exploded forward, his sword draw impossibly fast. Before Ali had used a dagger to deflect the blow, this time he countered with an attack of his own. He too exploded towards Tenchi. His tactic simple, he rammed straight into Tenchi before the drawn sword could complete its arc and reach him. His shoulder connected with the middle of Tenchi's chest, stopping his forward motion and sending him flying backwards, air and blood coming out of his mouth in gusts. They both landed in the dirt in a tangled heap. After a few seconds of stunned silence, Ali burst out laughing. When Tenchi was able to breathe again, he joined him. "I never thought of that as a possible counter," Tenchi managed to gasp out. Ali chuckled. Kalaripeatu teaches that the simplest attack is often the best. Tenchi wiped the blood off his mouth. "Satisfied?" Ali stood up and offered his hand to Tenchi. "Yes. My clan's honor is intact. Let's take you to Tsunade. Make sure I didn't crack any of your ribs." Danzo eyed the report before him and cursed inwardly, even though his expression gave no indication of his feelings. The campaign in Wave had become far more than he expected. Not only had it cost him hundreds of warriors, even if they were mostly IWA Nin, but politically it had cost him dearly. The document he had just read was a formal missive from the Eastern Trading Bloc. Any further moves on his part against Wave, who was now a part of the Crescent Moon Kingdom and as such a fully protected member of all those islands and coastal countries and their collective forces, would be met with a blockade. Despite what many thought, Danzo was neither reckless nor a fool. The truth of it was he needed the Eastern traders to be amenable to his empire. You can't have an army if you can't feed them or clothe them. Since his conquest of Earth Country, trade had dried up with the Wind Country. That blasted whelp Gara had closed off their borders and prevented any trade caravans from crossing. So all trade and goods solely came from the east, the island kingdoms and coastal cities. So Danzo could not afford an embargo with the eastern kingdoms. His eyes closed into near slits as he inwardly fumed at the boy who had caused all this. He should have killed Naruto when he had a chance. By all reports, the brat had set himself up halfway across the world, well away from the affairs of the major countries. The destructive power with which he had crumbled the Hokage's tower worried Danzo. The boy had obviously tapped the Ninetales within. That was a problem that needed dealing with. He leaned back in his chair, holding on to that thought. He needed Naruto either taken care of or kept away until he could rebuild his forces. Danzo did not like the idea of being at the mercy of other countries. These petty logistics were an annoyance. He would appoint someone to fix that problem. Someone loyal. Danzo had no shortage of loyal men. One such boy had left his office not more than 10 minutes prior. The root member Sai had given a very clear and succinct report on the action in Wave. His team's capture and escape was interesting. Danzo believed what he said, but he knew better than to think Naruto was dead. A kunai to the chest may not have been enough. Even if that was the real Naruto. By all accounts, there were thousands of clones running around. The account did show him that he could add 2 more loyal members to his list. Niji was a powerful warrior, an important clan member. The girl Ino showed immense potential right here in his employ. Those mind tricks of her clan were renowned. He shook his head. Naruto. He had to deal with that threat. A slow frown spread across Danzo's face. That became resolve. He motioned for one of his guards and called for a messenger nin. He would outsource that particular problem. And maybe kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Writing on a piece of paper, and sealing it with wax, he handed his message to the ninja who appeared moments later. Take this to the Hidden Grass Village. He barked the command. The man bowed. Whom do I give it to, my lord? Danzo smirked. Don't worry, he will find you. Shikamaru slipped unnoticed into the small shed behind his father's house. He glanced around quickly to ensure that he was alone. Once he confirmed it, he closed his eyes and listened carefully. The only sounds he picked up were the crickets in the yard. They had stopped for a second when he passed, but they were back making their melodic music. Anyone who would have followed him would have had to pass the same way and disturb them. In that way, they were nature's alarm system. Relatively satisfied, he pressed a board on the floor that slid away to reveal a hole in a ladder. He slipped down it quietly, closing it behind him. When he got to the ground floor, he was greeted with a nod by his father, the large shelter lit by a single dim kerosene lamp. Glad you made it, son. The place is still in disarray after Naruto's attack. Shikamaru shrugged. Danzo is still collecting his wits about him, and consolidating his army, I imagine. Yes, Shikaku confirmed. We are moving our patrols in tighter. There doesn't seem to be any action planned at the moment. Okay, Shikamaru nodded. Shino and Kiba are at Bunker 7 with the Suma-sensei. He's recovering quickly. That's good. Tell him his nephew is for now being largely ignored by Danzo. Konohamaru is keeping a low profile. Kurenai had a talk with him to make sure he doesn't stick out too much. Best Danzo forget he's there for as long as possible. Shikamaru nodded and sat. He closed his eyes, pushing his fingers together. His dad let him think, instead looking closely at his son, taking in every detail. Shikamaru looked harder. His face was set. What little body fat he had was converted to lean hard muscle. Clearly he had been training hard while in seclusion. Father, Shikamaru said, eyes still closed. I need to increase my attack capabilities. Any move we make now would result in defeat unless we can all attain a level that surpasses that of the current clan heads. I've discussed this already with Kiba and Shino. We need all of our generation who are in the resistance to surge ahead. I think, yes, I am sure that with that level of power we could attempt to remove Danzo, but not before. Shikaku stood up and walked over to a small table in the corner of the room. It was covered with a thick film of dust. This bunker had not been used in 50 years, before either of their times by generations. From the time of the first Hokage. All except for a single bound leather book. It bore a symbol of the Nara clan and their techniques. He picked it up and, walking over solemnly, handed it to Shikamaru. In here are all the clan's secrets. Our most fearsome techniques. More than half of these I myself have never attempted because of the risk to myself. Some have been forbidden. Some long forgotten. Shadow users have been around since the beginning of the ninja way. We have cousins in far-flung countries who use variations on our techniques, where they have some of their own jutsu. I've heard of a family that could travel via shadow. Physically melt into a shadow and appear out of another. I've heard of another that could send out his shadow, disconnected from his body. All the notes we have on those and our guesses on how it's done are in here. Shikamaru rocked back with the words of his father. This book represented the entire shadow user history and knowledge. I will speak quietly to Shino's father and Kiba's mother. Come here again in 1 week to collect similar compendiums for them both. Nodding, Shikamaru stood. We will also need Niji, Hinata, Chuji, and Lee trained as well. Don't worry, they will be. Shikamaru walked over and gave his father a hug. A deep, sincere one. 1 year, Dad. I promise you in 1 year we will be ready. Coo, Orochimaru chuckled to himself quietly, lounging on the throne-like chair he sat in. The dead messenger in front of him had not even tried to fight back. He glanced at the scroll on his lap again, and waved his hand at the body in front of him. 2 of his sound ninja grabbed the corpse by his arms and dragged it out of sight. What does it say? Kabuto asked speculatively. It seems our old friend Danzo is extending us an offer. Orochimaru chuckled again. We will merge grass country with rock and fire. In exchange, we will have free rein to conduct our little experiments. Kabuto was rocked back on his heels, a shocked expression dominating his face. He pushed his glasses back along his nose bride, a habit he displayed when deep in thought. Is he sincere? Orochimaru grinned. I believe so. We will of course take our precautions, but he wants something from me, and is offering something I need. Test subjects. Goo. What is he asking for? In due time, Kabuto, in due time. Orochimaru cackled. And what do you think about this apprentice? From the shadows, the red eyes of Sasuke Uchiha peered into Orochimaru's. I don't care. Orochimaru barked out a laugh. Excellent. Perhaps we can even test your new skills against some of your former friends. The laughter echoed in the dimly lit cavern. The Spirit Wolf clan members Ravi and Rashid were in foul spirits when they arrived in front of the guild house a few weeks later. Their clothes were ragged and the camels were nearly dead on their feet. However, the huge sacks containing the gold and jewels were intact. Mostly. So Ali reported at the meeting table set up on the top floor of the tower. They made good time considering they were attacked twice by less honorable raiding thieves. He chortled. Clearly people unfamiliar with my clan. Well, at least the gold reached Tengaku safely. I gotta ask though, why didn't they just seal it away? Make it lighter for traveling? Jiraiya asked speculatively. Oh, I can answer that. Tenchi interjected, scratching at the bandages wrapped around his decidedly cracked ribs. In this part of the world we do not trust things taken from scrolls. All may not be what it appears to be. There is a story a long time ago of a man who paid an assassin with gold taken from a sealing scroll for carrying. The assassin went back to his village and discovered the gold had disappeared. It was a trick, you see. The seal scroll had temporarily created this treasure. Of course the assassin found the man and tore out his heart, but it was a lesson well learned. Ali nodded. We have all heard the story for generations. It is considered useless, any treasure taken from a seal scroll. No one will touch it. Naruto spoke up. I'm glad Rashid and Ravi made it okay. They're glad too. I'd say they kept enough bars and baubles for themselves to keep them in good women and wine for months when they get out into the world again. Ali laughed. The whole table smiled. Thieves will be thieves, even honorable ones. And they had earned it. Tsunade cleared her throat. Next order of business. The hospital is fully functional. I will be splitting my time between there and training Sakura, now that she's back from gallivanting around the world. She turned to Sakura. I hope you don't think you're going anywhere for the next few months. We have a lot of catching up to do. Sakura saw the glint in her sensei's eyes and swallowed. The girls' team was gathered in the far corner of the room, standing next to the boys' team. Only what they described as the village council Tenchi, Tsunade, Jiraiya, Mabry, Guerrera, Tora and Naruto were seated. I have to report that training at the school is going very well. The first student team of Ainari, Gen, Siren and Miran performed admirably in the wave defense. I'd say given a year again, they can be used as a young genin team. Tenchi said happily. Jiraiya puzzled out loud. Oh, what is it, you self-righteous toad? Tsunade asked exasperated. I was thinking, we are not really training ninja. Our teams are very broadly based. Look at Naruto's team. We have a ninja, a samurai, and a capoeirist. Sakura's team we have a ninja, a kung fu practitioner, and an archer. That same team, Inari's, we have an archer, a waterbender, a blind ninja, and a Dijitsu user. What's your point, Jiraiya? Tenchi asked testily. The Sennin had a habit of rambling when he was on to something really important. Just this, I don't think the terms genin, chunin, jounin etc. apply to our teams. I propose a new grading scheme for Tengaku. I like it, Naruto said excitedly. But what? The table was silent for a minute as everyone thought deeply. Surprisingly, old man Tora was the first to speak. He did so with a laugh. Well, everything here is based on the idea of heaven, so I say go with it. The academy graduates would be Tendu, the next level up would be Tenchi, then Dei Tenchi after that. Naruto looked puzzled. Tendu? Mabry laughed. Baby angels. Cherubs. I like it. Tsunade smirked. So I'd say my apprentices team are Tenchi angel class. With some work I can get them all up to date Tenchi eventually. Jiraiya looked across at Senji and Nagi. You guys as well. Tenchi level. You will need to work harder. Both boys nodded in agreement. Hey, what about me? Naruto asked. He was afraid to hear the answer though. The knowledge that he never passed above a genin in Konoha, and even that took him 3 tries, still remained with him. Ah, Naruto. Well, we need to talk about that. As a warrior you have moments where you are above a day Tenchi. Then some weaknesses that I'd say are solidly Tenchi level. However, your sheer power, even with your control being what it is now, are, well, enormous. Tenchi said musingly. That plus this letter from the island nations leads me to propose something. What letter? Naruto almost shouted. Why, the letter officially recognizing Tengaku as the hidden village of the island nations. It arrived by Carrier Hawk this afternoon. Even with our distance, our ability to be there in hours rivals that of any other country's hidden village. So with that in mind, coupled with a few other things. Other things? Mabry asked with a smirk in his voice. Naruto glanced from one to the other. There was a smile on everyone's face. Were they making fun of him? Why, the stories are growing and growing about our Naruto here, did you not hear? Naruto the city destroyer. Naruto the Shinigami. Naruto who broke a sandstorm. Naruto who faced down Danzo, the self-proclaimed emperor of the West, and crumbled his tower. Naruto, the leader of the heavenly village. With a pause, Tenchi leaned in and his eyes took on a dark tint. Naruto, the shadow of heaven. There was silence around the table. After a few beats, Mabry spoke up. Now that's a name to bear proudly. Naruto was dumbfounded. Jiraiya clapped Naruto on the back. Gaki, the world will call you Tenshikage, the shadow of heaven. We both know you need more training though, right? Naruto nodded dumbly, too shocked to grin. So his friends did it for him, pride swelling in the room. Nagi stretched and yawned. Dawn had come and gone several hours ago, yet he was only now stirring. He sat in his bed and stared out the window. From his vantage point in the tower, he could see the students training. Tenchi and Tora were pushing them hard. He could make out Inari's team, doing a chamber that the others had not reached as yet. Across on the other side of the village he saw the still figure of Naruto with Ma and Pa Toad on either side of him. Naruto was doing the natural chakra control exercises that were necessary for him to progress in his sage training. Nagi stared at them for a few seconds before seeing movement a little further down the same field. Senji was training as well, practicing with his new swords. The enchanted twin Kodaichi were still unfamiliar to Senji. Since the meeting a few days ago, everyone had thrown themselves into their training with renewed vigor. Word of the adventures of Naruto and all the teams had spread through the village like wildfire. There was a sense of immense pride that their village's name was spreading, and that their leader, Naruto, was garnering such respect. Nagi himself, however, wasn't sure where to begin his training. He had learned his fighting from a fellow refugee many years ago. While they had been on the run from various warlords, he had been instructed in the forms that Tenchi referred to as capoeira. But Nagi was no fool. He knew he was a novice at best at his martial art. The only thing that elevated him beyond a Tendu in Tengaku standards was his use of the shadow arts. And that was something he did instinctively. He had approached Tenchi, who admitted he was unable to instruct him in capoeira. He knew of a few men who practiced it, but none were accessible. Tenchi had then gone on to suggest that Nagi consider the still building Tengaku library. There may be scrolls there of worth to him. Nagi had as yet found nothing. He was not the only one though. On one of his excursions to the massive pile of unsorted scrolls that was the martial arts section, he was joined by Calamity. She too had no way to further her art. She was an archer who realized that she was dead in close combat. Also, she wished to improve her archery skills and had yet to find someone to help. Kakashi was not an archer. He offered to teach her basic taijutsu, but she did not feel that was a good fit for her. Thus it was that a friendship was struck up between the two of them. A camaraderie of hopelessness. Nagi shrugged and went to get ready. Today they would look some more. 15 minutes later, Nagi exited the tower and walked down Main Street towards the library. He waved to Guerrera and his baby Gabriella as he walked by. She was walking now. There was still a ready supply of young village girls willing to babysit and play with her, so Guerrera had plenty of time to help out at the academy and with the clones in finishing the village's construction. In front of the library, Calamity stood waiting on Nagi. He waved to her and she smiled back, but only briefly. Morning, Nagi. Another day spent looking through a mountain of dusty scrolls, she said plaintively. Yup, he said simply. There just wasn't anything they could do about it. Yeah. Have you had breakfast yet, though? Calamity asked. Not really hungry, Nagi shrugged. But we can go if you want, the scrolls aren't going anywhere. They walked off the steps of the library, heading around the corner to the tea shop they had been coming to for the past couple of days. The proprietor was a kindly old man who had to be pushing 80. His tea shop was immaculate, and the tea was the best Calamity had ever had. He greeted them with a smile as broad and earnest as the sun. Good morning, my young friends. He ushered them to a table by the window. Morning, Nuik. Calamity returned the smile. She genuinely liked the man. Ah, my child. You have finally said my name right. Nuik beamed happily. I cannot tell you the laughter of the spirits of my ancestors at my misfortune. Per Nuik being called Nu Hik or Nuk. It was enough to make me almost desire a more common name like Bob. He chuckled at his own joke and went over to another customer. There were 2 other tables occupied, and the citizens all seemed to be animatedly discussing the stories they had heard about the adventures of Naruto. The treasure hunt had grown in leaps and bounds, until he now seemed to have waved aside the sandstorm with a flick of the wrist, and faced down the king of all ghosts in the pit of hell to return with the treasure that now burst at the seams of the vaults in the tower. Nagi frowned in annoyance. He and Senji may as well have not even been there. Those versions of the story he had heard that did mention them relegated them to mere bystanders. On one of the tables was a crew of boisterous brothers who had built a cattle and pig farm at the edge of town. They were larger than life, the 4 of them all ranging over 6 feet tall with shoulders as broad as a doorway. Calamity had heard from her father that they were extremely hard workers. Orphaned at a young age, they had stuck together to make something of their life. They had a farm before in the northern regions of the Badlands, but a raiding party from the Blood Country had destroyed it all, and killed the wife of the only married brother. That had happened a few months before the populating of Tengaku, and Naruto had personally selected them to join his new village. One of the brothers was drinking sake, heavily. The others seemed to be consoling him as best they could. From what whispers of the conversation they picked up, Calamity and Nagi gathered it was the anniversary of his wife's murder. What will it be this morning, young ones? Noik asked gently. Tea and a bento box for me, please, Calamity answered. Just the tea for me, Nagi chimed in, gazing out of the window. The village had really come together. It felt complete. Like a home he never had. Hey you! The drinking brother called out to Nuik. The old man smiled at him kindly and walked over to the table. Bring me a bottle of sake. Now! The well on his way to inebriated farmer bellowed. It is early in the day to fill your body with such poison. Against my advice you drank that bottle which you brought into my store. I do not carry poisons on my menu. I will ask you once more to refrain from disturbing my other customers. Nuik calmly told the farmer. One of the other brothers at the table put his hand on the one that was drinking. He's right, Chang. Let's just go home. We have more sake there. With a wrench, Chang pulled his shoulder away from his brother and stood up. No! I like it here and I asked you to bring me a bottle of sake. What kind of shop doesn't have a few bottles of sake? Nuik looked up at the man who stood almost a whole head taller than him and said, I am but a frail old man. Would you crush me with your giant hands? Just to fill your body with poison? If you wish to kill yourself, please do it outside of my store. I am sure your woman would be proud to see what has become of you, threatening a frail, weak old man. Nagi and Calamity got up to intervene. They'd not stand by and watch what was about to happen. Chang's face went red. His eyes bulged in their sockets. There was a scrape of chairs as the other brothers rose to intervene as well. They were all too slow though as Chang reached out with a backhanded slap that was intended for Nuike's face. Why, he would show the cruel old man. What did he know of pain? The pain of losing the woman you loved. The thing was, his fist never connected. Nuike seemed to waver before him and his hand passed swiftly by his face, mere inches from it. Then there was pain. A sharp blinding pain in his temple followed by blackness. Nagi didn't see anything too suspicious. The bigger man had swung, missed then passed out drunk. Nothing too strange about that. Except that Nuik hadn't moved. Not an inch. His hands were behind his back. Nothing too strange about that. But his face hadn't ever stopped smiling. He never seemed in the least bit threatened by the bigger man. Nagi hadn't survived in the Badlands on his own by being stupid. As the other brothers apologized profusely for their drunk sibling who had passed out, Nagi noticed a small red welt on the unconscious farmer's left temple. He glanced back at Nuik, who was waving off apologies. A man must mourn a loss of a loved one. But then he must move on and be a man. This pitiful self-mutilation, poisoning one's system with alcohol, is befitting of a child only. The old man apologized to his other customers and showed the brothers to the door, assuring them they would be welcomed back tomorrow as usual. Nagi and Calamity sat back down and exchanged a glance. Good Nagi, though, she caught it too. For the first time they noticed the aura around Nuik. It was an aura similar to that of Tenchi, Jiraiya and Tsunade, but harder to pick up. When he came back with their order, Calamity asked him casually, "Where are you from originally, Nuik?" The old man smiled broadly. "A small village in the armpit of the world. A village that no longer exists." "Tell us about it," Nagi asked, genuinely curious. Nuik looked at them and gave a small laugh. "It has been a while since I've spoken about my beloved village. It is a story for another time. I have customers. Perhaps another day I will regale you with the story of my home, Senanju." He walked over to greet two new customers, showing them to a table. Calamity looked puzzled. She glanced over at Nagi. "You know, I think I've heard that name somewhere before." Nagi shook his head. "Not me. I've never heard of it. But it's pretty obvious that Nuik is more than he seems to be." The two of them finished their breakfast and headed back to the library, thoughts of the enigma that was Nuik getting lost in their search for more information on their arts. Konoha, if a fly had wandered into the room at that moment, it may have died from the tension alone. On one side stood Orochimaru and Kabuto, with Sasuke standing off to the side nonchalantly. On the other, Danzo stood with the remaining three of his most trusted guards, Centipede, Snake, and Scorpion. Danzo still cursed the loss of Gekko in Naruto's attack. Danzo had just reiterated his deal to Orochimaru, who had chuckled slightly, but not answered as yet. The silence stretched on, and Danzo tensed almost imperceptibly. If Orochimaru attacked now, it would be close. Very close. Even with the amount of hidden ninja he had nearby, this was a Sannin in front of him. Danzo himself may be able to take him, but it would be close. "We will accept," Orochimaru hissed with a giant smile on his face. "Of course my apprentices and myself will be removed from the Konoha bingo book." It was a statement, not a question, but Danzo nodded anyway in response. Ku. "Splendid," Orochimaru cackled. "In return you will create for me an army that no one in the world has ever seen," Danzo said with iron in his voice. "I still believe that nothing can take the place of a highly trained soldier. But I need numbers, and I do not care what methods you employ. We have an accord." Sasuke eyed the proceedings with rancor. He had heard about the destruction that Dobe had wrought upon the village. He had almost not believed it until he'd seen the rubble that was the Hokage Tower. His eyes had filled with frustration at how far ahead Nataro had gotten. The advantage being the container of the Kyuubi had given the dead last. Sasuke had told himself he cared not what Naruto did. He was not competing with him, all Sasuke cared about was killing Itachi. But that felt less and less true as he heard about his former teammate. The twinge of anger when he heard he'd be banished. The small spark of pride that preceded the resentment at the stories of his growth and strength. Orochimaru used it as a tool to ignite the fire within Sasuke and inspire him to train harder. Sasuke had no problem letting Orochimaru think such elementary psychology was working on him. He glanced sidelong at Orochimaru. The Sannin was a fountain of knowledge. Just when Sasuke felt he might be peaking, and the time would come to kill Orochimaru, he showed Sasuke something new and invaluable. He was no fool, though. He knew that Orochimaru intended to take his body as a host. That was a year off still, though. So he had some time. Time to train. Time to plan. Hinata went through the moves again. Her father watched without saying a word. His eyes focused on every twitch of her muscles, checking for any imperfections in her form. This would be the 20th time she was trying it this day, and so far, he had spotted none. With a release of breath, she slapped the air in front of her and pivoted. Her backhand raised, then came in close, elbow almost touching her body. Her knees bent, then extended, helping her arch and flip in a perfect crescent. And so she moved, hit, bend, turn. Faster and faster. The chakra was visible in her palms now. A faint image of twin lion heads extended several inches away from fists. This was the style Hinata had asked to learn. She had perfected it a month ago, and was now moving beyond it, into something new. Something she had wanted to try. Hayashi Hyuga watched with pride as she began the new movements. Instead of the constant ebb and flow of the normal open fist style, Hinata was using lightning-quick movements and stops. The flow would speed up then stop abruptly. The force, however, would not be stopped in her hand, but pushed forward simultaneously. The attack was devastating on a target. It did more than just close a tenkatsu, it rend the target point. When Hinata had first been successful on the theory, it had converted a board not into two even halves as in other open fist attacks, but into a perfect whole, sawdust exploding out. Crack! He saw that she had reached that point. Her speed and force of chakra had combined to go past the point where a normal person could have safely moved. Crack! Her hands slapped the air. The sound barrier being broken again and again as the lion fist attack took on a much more vicious nature. Crack! Crack! Boom! Perspiration dripped down Hinata's face. The exertion was starting to take its toll. She focused her eyes on the imaginary target before her. Saw in her mind the possible defensive moves and moved to counter, attack, push, destroy. Enough! Hayashi barked, not without softness in his voice, however. Hinata slowed to a stop. Her technique had a major flaw still. It relied on momentum. She could not stop at will, it had to be slowed to a stop where she'd tear her body apart. After a few seconds, she was at a standstill, panting heavily. She glanced over at her father. Beside him stood Hanabi, who was smiling broadly at her older sister. Their relationship had improved by leaps and bounds over the past few months. That technique is a force to be reckoned with, daughter. A juggernaut that would be almost impossible to defend against once you get going, however it is far from finished. Hayashi said calmly. Yes, father, Hinata panted. You have come far in a short time, my heir. I have much further to go still, she said, her eyes glinting with steely determination. Tengaku. The first thing Anko saw when she opened her eyes was the ceiling fan. As far as she knew, hell had no ceiling fans. The way her body hurt, though, it had to be hell. She groaned and a face came into view. It was a young girl who looked at her kindly yet uncertainly. Sure, try not to move too much, the girl said quietly. Anko tried to talk but felt the raspiness in her throat. It was as if she had swallowed a buttload of gravel. The girl anticipated this and gave Anko a cup. She took it gratefully and poured it back, disgusted to find it filled with only ice. She let a piece of the ice hit the back of her throat, and it was like fire. After a while, though, it felt good. Where am I? Anko asked. Her memory was hazy. She felt she should know. You're in Tengaku. Please try not to speak too much, the kindly voice spoke again. Anko closed her eyes. Tengaku? Heaven? Well, why was she in pain then? Why? It all came back in a flood of memories. Her arrest by Danzo's goons, the cell. The first guard who... Tears came unbidden, streaming down her face. As each horror replayed in her memory, a sob escaped Anko. She felt like a mound of pain wrapped in her old skin, the mental scars of what happened ripping her to shreds. Tsunade walked in a few minutes later, telling the young trainee to leave. She held Anko's hand, letting her get it out of her system. Anko registered it was Tsunade next to her, but couldn't stem the tide of her pain. They stayed like that for almost an hour, Tsunade not saying a word. Anko finally had nothing left. The tears stopped, the sobs disappeared. Her eyes looked at Tsunade. Tengaku? A village that Naruto started. Halfway around the world from Konoha. It's a name that befits the place, as you'll find out soon enough. How did I get here? The Konoha Underground got you out. They contacted Naruto, who brought you to me. A lot more happened besides that, but that's the essentials. Anko nodded, glancing down at her arms, all she could see above the sheets. They were scarred horribly. She shuddered to think what lay beneath the sheets. She steeled herself. Tell me, what happened to me? So Tsunade began the litany of horrors that she deduced had been inflicted upon Anko. She did it in as clinical a way as possible, leaving nothing out. Anko nodded at the end of it all. I remember some of it. She stared out the window, hearing the sounds of birds and feeling a breeze on her face. She was alive. Alive, and she would be able eventually to extract her revenge. Her eyes closed into slits. How soon will I be able to move? She asked. Tsunade looked hard at Anko. Walking? A week maybe. More than that is up to you. Anko nodded. She was strong enough to do this. A fire of hatred began to burn in her belly. It would require hard work to do this, but that fire would feed her, support her. Anko was accustomed to doing things through sheer willpower. It had helped her survive Orochimaru, her sensei. It would help her survive now. Naruto, she said quietly. He made this place? Brought me here? Yes. Tsunade said proudly. Tell me about him. Iruka sat silently looking out over the village his student had built. It was a huge accomplishment. The swelling of pride he felt was something never before experienced. Many students go on to be great ninja, but few went on to be great leaders. And Naruto, even though he had help, had become such a person. He sighed. The loss of his tongue was a severe price. It meant he could not teach ever again. The problem of Danzo seemed very far away in the idyllic little village. But all was not as it seemed. Naruto had gathered some incredibly strong people around him. Some had potential to be even stronger. Iruka was happy to see so many familiar faces around his former and favorite student. Sakura, Jiraiya, Tsunade, even Kakashi. Iruka wanted Konoha to be free of Danzo. He did not envy the task the others had taken upon themselves. He, however, could do very little at this point. He was a fugitive, and not the best warrior in the village. He was still a Chunin, of course, but he was no Kakashi. His gift had always been teaching. The odd scientist was walking by at that moment, his arms full of books. One fell from the massive pile in his arms. He struggled for a few seconds to retrieve it himself, but Iruka was there and picked up the book, handing it back to him. Yoshi smiled at him, relieved. Thank you, kind sir, he said with a flourish. Iruka smiled and shrugged. Yoshi's eyes flashed at him. Ah, you're the unfortunate ninja who was mutilated. Sorry about that. I also heard you were a teacher. Are you going to be teaching here? Iruka shook his head in self-pity. He pointed to his open mouth, the movement clear. How could he teach if he couldn't speak? Yoshi frowned at him. That's true. He adjusted the tower of books and shifted his balance. I once knew a clan who communicated solely with their secret language of finger movements. It was rather useful when they were on surveillance missions. A perfectly silent way of talking seems perfect for ninja if you asked me. Yoshi carefully walked away, balancing the tower of books. There might even be a book or two on the finger language in the pitiful excuse for a library that we have. Iruka stood dumbfounded. Then he rocked his head back and made the motion to laugh. Nothing came out but tears. He almost ran to the library. Yoshi glanced back briefly. A man needs to feel useful, doesn't he, Yoshi? Yup. Tenchi had looked concerned when Nagi told of the incident in the tea shop. He had asked one question only. This is the old man, with the foot-long white beard? The one who walks as if he's gliding? Nagi nodded and Tenchi frowned. Naruto and Senjai were curious about his reaction, but he would only tell them to avoid going to the tea shop until he had a chance to look into it further. So that was the reason Naruto and Senjai had found themselves in the tea shop the very next day with Nagi and Calamity. Sakura was tied up with Tsunade and Hiroka was babysitting Gabriella for Guerrera. Noik was very pleased to see more customers, one being Naruto, the village leader, and welcomed them in. The trio sat down and stared at the man, not seeing the humor in anything as yet. It took a few minutes before Senjai did notice something finally. There isn't a scrap of wasted movement, he remarked in wonder. What do you mean? Naruto asked. Senjai spoke in hushed tones. Watch him walk, pick things up, move around. He's using exactly the energy needed for each activity. Nothing more. It's something Master Tenchi told me about once. It's something even he cannot achieve, he said. Naruto looked up at the old man, a new respect for the elder shop owner blooming. So he's a martial artist. Like I said, Nagi remarked, still watching Noik. The man did indeed move very gracefully. He was puzzled though. There was a sense of a coiled snake in every movement, but he felt nothing but peace radiating from the old man. The others felt it too. When the man approached with their meal, Calamity spoke up. None of them noticed the man in the cloak who slipped into the tea shop. Noik, would you tell us about yourself? There is not much to tell, young one. Poor humble Noik comes from a poor humble village. A village so poor that many cannot raise children, so those that are born are thrown into the sea, and we say they are returning to where they come from. We had no land good enough to farm, no minerals worth mining. Nothing of worth except the pride of its people. That's horrible! Naruto exclaimed. Noik seemed to lap up the attention. Yes, it is indeed horrible, my lord Tenchikage. So any money humble Noik made was sent back to the village, so that the babies would not have to be sent back home. You can't possibly make enough from this tea shop to support a village, Senjai exclaimed. Noik shook his head. Alas, the village is no more. Perhaps one day it will revive and be reborn somewhere else, but my home village of Sananju was destroyed by a raiding warlord while I was away doing the duties of the master of Sananju. Now poor humble Noik is a tea shop owner looking for nothing more than a peaceful life. The man who had slipped in the tea shop minutes ago froze. He found himself glued to his seat. Tenchi should have known that saying not to go would have prodded the boys to find themselves in here before he could investigate. He started to cold sweat in his cloak. He had been about to accost the old man to see how he would defend himself. That would allow Tenchi to identify the style, and thus decide on the tea shop owner. But now, Tenchi thanked every god he had ever heard of that he hadn't been fool enough to try anything as yet. If Noik was indeed who he claimed to be, the master of Sananju, then Tenchi was by the grace of some deity somewhere allowed to live another day. As if hearing his name in Tenchi's thoughts, he turned to face him and smiled warmly. It is rather warm in here for such a cloak, Master Tenchi. Perhaps you have a fever? I will bring you some tea. Naruto, Nagi, Senjai and Calamity all turned to see Tenchi under a large brown cloak, face frozen in place. While Noik disappeared again, Tenchi managed to rip himself from his chair and walk over to their table. What are you doing here? Tenchi snapped at them. I told you to stay away. Naruto took the lead. We were curious. He seems very nice. I remember meeting him once in the valley and thinking that he was a kind-hearted man. Tenchi barked a laugh. Kind-hearted? That is the master of Sananju. Haven't any of you ever heard of it? From one to the other, they all looked at each other before chiming in with a unanimous nope. Tenchi sat down hard, almost talking to himself. You're sitting in a tea shop, talking to the most feared assassin in the world. I thought he was a legend. The boys and Calamity sat in shock, processing. As Noik approached the table, Naruto spoke first. Hey Noik, are you an assassin? There was dead silence. Tenchi hit his own face with his palm, incredulous at the stupidity of Naruto, and hoping he could defend them all long enough to get away. Noik laughed. Your spirit is full of fire and bravery. It is an honor to live in your village. Yes, that was the occupation of humble Noik before the massacre of my village. Naruto smiled at him and pointed at Nagi and Calamity. My friends cannot find a sensei to help them. Nagi does capoeira, and Calamity is an archer. Is there anything you can do to help? Noik raised his hands. Oh, poor frail Noik wouldn't presume to do such a thing. However, he looked at Naruto's earnest face. If the master of this village will trade a favor one day, then this weak tea shop owner will take them under his wing and teach them to fly. Tenchi opened his mouth to object. A favor to the master of Sananju was a blood debt. Naruto didn't know what the man would ask for. Naruto beat him to it. Any favor that will not harm someone in my village or that I care about is yours. Naruto beamed at Noik. The old man smiled back earnestly. It has been many years, but I feel the fire running through my veins once again. I will apprentice these two. Your trust in me is overwhelming, Lord Tenchikage. It's just Naruto, he replied sheepishly. Call me Naruto. Noik bowed to Naruto. You honor me, Lord Naruto. Now sit, finish your tea. He looked at Calamity and Nagi and his smile took on an eagerness. Tomorrow morning, be here as the sun rises. Nagi groaned. Dawn? How does anyone get up that early, though? No one saw anything, but suddenly Nagi was clutching the back of his head. Oh! He exclaimed. Why did you groan, young one? Are you brimming with anticipation? You should be. Noik allowed himself a contented smile and returned to his kitchen. Tenchi turned to Naruto, who looked very pleased with himself. Do you know what you've done? You've just gotten the world's best assassin to take on 2 apprentices. And now you owe him a favor. Tenchi stood to go. I don't know whether to be happy or afraid. Do you know what happened to the army that destroyed his village? No one does. They vanished without a trace a week later. He left the tea shop very confused. leaving a group of warriors excitedly speculating on what Nagi and Calamity would learn. Middle of nowhere, wind country, the cave hummed with power. The silhouette sat in silence, focusing the chakra needed to be there. There was no light in the cave, yet all were powerful enough ninja to be able to see without problems, even though they were only projecting to the cave. Konoha is becoming a bigger and bigger problem, one voice said. This silhouette was tall and broad-shouldered. He seemed to have a giant sword of some kind slung across his back. Yes, but not an insurmountable one. Say the word and I will gladly show Emperor Danzo my art, another shadow hissed. This one had what seemed like a high ponytail above its head. Not yet, a commanding voice exclaimed. The eyes on this one were bright even in the shadows, showing many concentric circles. Danzo will be taken care of in due time. We are still preparing the jutsu. It will be another few months before we can process the first Jinchuriki, even with the sped-up timeline. Humph! The shadow with red eyes exclaimed. I saw no reason to adjust our timeline. My reasons are my own, the shadow with circles in his eyes, clearly the leader, replied. What of the 9 tails? A smaller shadow, that looked like a hump with eyes, spoke up. My spies report that the 9 tails is in the far west. Halfway around the world. We still do not have an exact location, but I have formulated a plan to draw him out. Good, anything else? Yes, on the matter of Danzo, the hump continued, I have heard that he has joined forces with Orochimaru. There was a swear coming from the large shadow with the sword. You should have taken care of that problem before. He wasn't that much of a problem before, the hump replied. But I'll take care of Orochimaru when the time is right. The time is now, the leader said quietly. Daidara. You will eliminate Orochimaru. He knows enough of our plans to hinder us. We've let him live long enough. Heh, finally. My art will rend him to bloody mist and bone. More likely than not we'll be filling your space within a month, the hump snorted back. That is all. You each know what you need to do, the leader said. Daidara, you have 6 months to complete the task. Do not underestimate Orochimaru, he was once one of us. The shadows disappeared one by one. Far away in a city covered in almost eternal rain, a man with concentric circles in his eyes stared up at the sky and whispered to himself. Things are going to change. This age is ending. Pain will bring in the new age. Chapter 24, Growth, Wave Country. As he crested the hill, Ji-hoon cursed the sunlight beating down on his body. The only reason he was able to move in the daylight at all was that he was a half-breed. Somewhere along the way his mother had taken a human man and mated with him, devoured him afterward of course, and given birth to Ji-hoon and 4 siblings. What had followed was a very short childhood as demons grow faster than human. Within a matter of 5 years Ji-hoon had matured and destroyed his siblings, for that was the nature of their world. The land of demons looked down upon half-breeds, but still encouraged their creation. For that ability to go into the sun allowed them access to the broader world at large. And demons needed humans for various reasons. Sometimes food, sometimes slave labor. Ji-hoon, however, cursed the sun still. He could walk in it, but it still burned and blistered his skin, albeit more slowly than it would a full demon. Thus he moved wrapped in cloth like a traveler from wind country. He stood atop the hill and looked down at the entrance to wave country. The land here felt good. He smiled beneath the cloth draped over the lower half of his face. There was so much death here. He breathed it in, almost feeling the souls of the deceased feeding his power. There it was, the trace of the Kyuubi. Ever so slight. He vanished in a wisp of black smoke and reappeared on the far side of the destroyed bridge. There were a few people around, but none saw him. One of Ji-hoon's gifts from his accursed mother was the ability to be masked from the eyes of humans. He walked quietly through the people, glancing at them, but not really registering anyone in particular. It's stronger on the other side of the village, he told himself. Gliding along, he passed many buildings being repaired, which was not an uncommon sight after a battle as big as this one looked to be. But what was uncommon were the smiles on the faces of people. He slowed to hear snippets of conversations. Naruto. Did you see when he? Haha, that giant toad. Millions and millions of him. Naruto was everywhere. Ji-hoon frowned. He knew Naruto was the name of the vessel of Kyuubi. But if he had generated that many clones of himself, then why wasn't the fingerprint of the Kyuubi greater? There was the barest trace. He frowned and kept walking. Suddenly, He heard a whistling behind him and ducked just as a blade sliced the air where his head had been a second ago. He turned and saw a diminutive human with a shiny bald head sneering. 2 blades extended out from his arms. Ji-hoon could sense the chakra that was infusing them, allowing them to cut anything. There were very few blades in the world that could cut a demon, but Ji-hoon was half human. If he got cut, he wouldn't die, but the sun was still blazing down at him overhead. It would hurt very, very badly. I don't know who you are, and I can't see you. But I can feel your presence, Masahiro said, looking in Ji-hoon's general direction. I suggest you leave this village now, or me and my friends will just have to hurt you. He extended his right arm forward, pointing almost directly at the half-demon's face. You have a foul feel about you. Ji-hoon would still have killed the short man for his impudence if he did not feel the arrival of 2 other people. A giant thin man with a meat cleaver as big as he was landed next to them, along with an ordinary man who looked extremely bored to be there. I say we let him pass on through. It's not worth the hassle, Mizurai said, yawning. If you attack, Mizurai here will be killed, but you will lose the right side of your torso and Masahiro will take your head in 25 seconds. The tall one said, cocking his head to the side. The lazy one opened his eyes wide. Hey now, what the hell? Ji-hoon did not have time to play with these fools. He vanished in a puff of black smoke, reappearing at the end of the village. He could feel where Naruto had stood, and the scent of the Kyuubi was strongest here. It was old though, weeks old. He was gone. Ji-hoon cursed loudly. There was no scent leaving the village, which meant he could not track him any further. He had already tracked him halfway around the world, he would not be deterred now. With a final curse to the blazing sun, Ji-hoon recalled himself back to his home realm. Takada, Mizurai and Masahiro stood in a loose circle around the puff of smoke. Is he gone? Mizurai asked. Yes, thank the stars. Masahiro nodded. Takada wiped the sweat off his brow. 100% probability we would have all died. I thought you said we'd have gotten him? With just one acceptable loss? Masahiro responded. You're hurting my feelings here, guys. Mizurai raged in the background. I lied. We couldn't see him, could barely detect him. We'd all have been killed in under a minute, Takada said in a very flat voice. Masahiro sighed. Just when I was getting accustomed to the quiet days. Tengaku, Naruto inhaled, feeling the air fill his lungs. He blew it out slowly, focusing on the air as it passed through his throat and nose. He repeated the process 5 more times, then called the natural energy to him. He felt it like a warm wind, buffeting his body, filling him up, except there was no limit. There was just more and more. He felt like he could pull in the world. He stopped once it was in balance with his own chakra though, heeding the advice of Ma and Pa Toad. To go further would be a risk. No one could handle too much natural energy, not even sages. The entire world is energy, Naruto. Imagine absorbing the world. It's preposterous. Pa had explained. Naruto, now filled with energy, alone in the field, did something he had not told anyone he was doing. He visited the Kyuubi. In the recesses of his mind, the Kyuubi still snarled at him from behind the cage. The seal firmly in place, locking him in. Naruto strode over to the cage and shouted for its tenant. Hey Fox! Come out! We need to talk! What do you want, Baka? The fox growled at him. The giant form behind the bars glared at him, menace rolling off him in waves. You're pure energy, right? How did you become self-aware? I mean, how did you know you existed and think and all that? The fox laughed at him. Even if I explained it, you wouldn't understand. But I will tell you. I was once part of a greater demon, the Jubi. The Jubi was all-powerful, a child of Gaia herself. One of the 3 great monsters or titans of your early history. The first human ninja, a very powerful warrior, the Rikudo Sennin, did battle with Jubi. It was an epic battle that lasted a year exactly. On the 365th day, Rikudo threw down the Jubi and destroyed him. But one cannot destroy a titan. Jubi split itself into the 9-tailed beasts. I myself retain most of the memories and power of Jubi. Naruto, who was now sitting down listening to the story, raised his hand. But that doesn't add up. If Jubi had 10 tails, and he split up, and you have 9 tails, doesn't that just leave the 1 tail left? That's not how it works. Kyuubi barked at Naruto. Thus the tailed beasts were unleashed upon the world. Some are incredibly stupid, some powerful. None as powerful as I am, for I am the first. Naruto looked thoughtful. You said Jubi was one of 3 titans? Where are the other 2? Kyubi scoffed. The old ones care not for the affairs of us demons or humans. Cronus fathered Magnus, the current lord of Yomi. A foul-tempered youth whose time will come. Lucius wanders the world, we are told, but he takes many forms. No one or nothing has seen him in centuries. And this Gaia you keep speaking of, that's nature itself, Baka. The world, the universe. The chakra you are absorbing even now as you sit there quietly. That is Gaia. If you think demons are bad, wait till you ask something of Gaia. She is cold, cares nothing for any of her children or children's children. She is eternal, and we are all but a blink of an eye to her. Naruto nodded and stood up, dusting himself off, even though he didn't have to. That's all very interesting. If the land of Yomi ever becomes a threat, at least I know some of the people involved. Magnus, Kyubi, Gaia, the Titans. Okay. Baka, you understand nothing. If Magnus finds us here while you are playing nice and building houses, we are finished. I must be let free to battle him. Only I can defeat him, you remember that, Naruto? Naruto disappeared from his mindscape, leaving the Kyubi to snarl to himself. You remember, Naruto? Only I. You remember? I must be the one. I must be. I must. Dark Blade, Twin Strike. Senji cried as he charged the training dummy, spinning around and striking with both Kodachi at the same moment, from 2 different angles. Once he was past, he straightened, reverently sheathed the blades, and turned to see the damage. The training dummy was unmarked. Senji smirked and confidently walked back around to the front of the wooden post. Then B blew on it. It blew apart in a shower of splinters. Not an explosion, but rather that the wood had been cut and shattered while still remaining in the exact same position. It was one of his more potent standard attack styles. It was good to see that his new swords handled his style even better than his original swords had. Of course, the Twin Strike was one of his more simplistic moves. It used the concept of resonant impacts, exponentially increasing the energy, and thus the damage of the attack. Against wood, it turned a solid log into splinters shaped like a log. Against a human, it caused internal bleeding and broken bones. He turned to the other training dummies he'd set up earlier and proceeded to go through his entire repertoire of special attacks and even standard kata. His new weapons lived up to every expectation and even surpassed them several times over. Even his most powerful, thus far unstoppable attack was near perfect, and even then the imperfection could be lain at his lack of skill using 2 unfamiliar weapons rather than the swords themselves. He tried it again, just to be sure. Dark Blade, Jikensuki. Using his quick step, Senji vanished towards the practice dummy, moving faster than a normal human could follow. Both swords were unsheathed in a single moment, and Senji thrust so quickly to the heart of the dummy that each hit blended together, sounding like one impact. The 2 swords struck 6 times each, moving in a clockwise motion, a full rotation of the clock. He flew past the dummy, swords held at his sides. The result was surgical in its nature. A circular piece of the dummy, right where the heart would be, popped out of the chest, falling to the ground. Senji nodded at the expected results. Then he turned his attention to his weapons. With his original swords, there would be some signs of wear, sometimes scuff marks, showing where they were being stressed. With these enchanted/cursed Kodachi, however, there were no stress marks, no signs of wear, they weren't even scratched. At that moment, Senji looked over to where his friend Naruto was training. Apparently he'd surpassed the meditation level of his training and was now sparring topless with the old toad called Pa. The catch was, they were sparring with a level of strength and endurance that even a Sannin would be hard-pressed to match. Also, he could see that Naruto was modifying the moves Pa Toad was showing him, matching them to his own unpredictable style that made it that much more devastating. Senji looked to his unmarked blades and then back to his friend training. He glanced back and forth a few more times before a wicked grin crossed his expression. Time to start pushing myself. I need to develop more original moves. Make myself as unpredictable and surprising as Naruto is becoming, he said to the weapons in his hands. Time to start training for real. Nagi cursed, but only in his head. Time had shown that his new sensei had hearing that could pick up the softest whisper at incredible distances, and Nagi had the bruises behind his head to prove it. So for the 100th time today he stood on top of the thin wooden post, and worked on his balance. Noik watched him closely and disdainfully. You have the balance of an obese woman, he scoffed. Oh, but if only Lord Tenchikage had thought to give me someone more worthy to train. I could have molded him a mighty warrior. Noik came over and slapped the pole, watching Nagi waver on it to maintain his balance. Bah, instead he gave me this. Bird droppings is what you are. But I, master of the sun source, will make something of you. I will show the Lord that humble Noik can change bird droppings into hard metal. Nagi wavered again. Sensei, he had learned that he could not call him Noik anymore. He had 2 more bruises to prove that particular point. Sensei, when are you going to start teaching me this Senanju stuff? Noik looked startled. Then cackled with laughter. You! I will not be teaching you the arts of my village. Oh no, one must be born of my village to learn the ultimate arts. No, for you and the woman, you will learn something much simpler. He motioned for Nagi to get down from the post. Calamity was now finishing the laps of Tengaku Noik had her do every morning. While he harped on about Nagi's balance, he chided Calamity for her lack of stamina and endurance. Although he did make sure to mention every day it was because she was born a woman. Sit, both of you. I will explain where we will go from here. As the 2 students sat down, Noik too took a lotus position in front of them. They were in a small field sitting next to the lake. The water was serene as Noik fixed them with a cold stare. Lord Tenchikage has asked me to train you. This I will do. He pointed to Nagi. I have seen your skills and they are deplorable. However, I am familiar with the techniques you use. It is of course a shadow of my own martial arts, having been stolen a millennia ago. However, the people who used it were honorable and paid on time. I will instruct you on furthering your deplorable skills. Nagi tried very hard to hide what he was thinking. He had never met anyone other than the one man who had showed him how to fight, who used the capoeira. And Noik knew a whole race of people that did? He looked over at Calamity. You have the unfortunate burden of being born a woman. This is not your fault. I can see you are willing to work hard to overcome this. Calamity bit her tongue, knowing better than to talk back. She had been subjected to this for weeks now, and she just accepted that the old man had his views, and seemed to be willing to work with her nonetheless. This is good, he continued. It is also good that you have chosen a weapon that will allow you to strike from far. Archery is in itself an art form that can be taken to extreme heights. I will teach you to know where your target is. To know where your target is going to be. To hit your target from miles away, never wavering, never missing. This will be difficult because you are a woman, but despair not, for I am magnificent, and can turn even moldy bread into a meal fit for a king. Calamity flushed, unable to hide her anger much longer. Noik saw this and smiled. I see you are bursting with excitement, ready to begin. That is also good. So let us begin. Konoha, hidden bunker, outskirts of Training Ground 7. Shikamaru sat perfectly still in the darkness, sweat beading on his forehead. The abandoned underground bunker that he was currently in had fallen into disrepair decades ago. The far side of the room was collapsed under rubble. In fact, the only way in and out was to move a rather large rock and push it back in place. Fortunately, the air vents were still open. He had been here for 3 weeks already, with most of the time spent either reading or practicing. It had not been as simple as planned, getting the clan training books to Shino and Kiba. Danzo had instituted a very strict curfew, and his route were on high alert all over Konoha, fearing another strike from Naruto. Shikamaru doubted that was the real reason, but he could do nothing about Danzo right now. Not yet. Regardless, they had managed to get the books to both Shino and Kiba, and they had all went their separate ways to train. Shino had gone to the mountains, saying something about a massive colony. Kiba had gone into the wilderness with Akamaru. They all vowed to return in 1 year, masters of their clan's secrets, and ready to take down Danzo. Shikamaru sighed, the pounding behind his eyes growing in intensity. He'd read the clan book cover to cover. Not one of the techniques described in the book was easy. Not that he expected they would be. The first thing he had to come to understand was that he had to unlearn some of what he was accustomed to. Normally a Nara at Chunin level could manipulate his shadow, and there were any number of ways he could do that. But Shikamaru needed to go beyond Chunin, possibly even surpass Jounin. And the book was very specific about how that could be done. Not many had done it, only 2 of his ancestors had been able to accomplish it. Shikamaru needed to become a shadow himself. The book explained that to the normal person, a shadow was just something created by light, and an object blocking or absorbing that light. But to a skilled ninja who understood the world underneath the world, or saw underneath the underneath, a shadow was actually a true darkness. An entity all by itself. The Nara clan could force the entity to move a little, by bending it to their will slightly. But to truly control the shadow, one had to bond with it, in essence becoming a shadow himself. Of course, that's all I need to do, Shikamaru had thought. Become a shadow. Easy, right? 3 weeks later he felt not much closer to achieving anything at all. He's gained an appreciation for the dark. It certainly played to his penchant for solitude. The book didn't really go into much detail about how he was supposed to become a shadow. So he'd been meditating on it, putting his intellect to the task, barely moving save when necessary. Freaking hopeless, he whispered, keeping his eyes closed. He felt it then. Minute. The faintest of stirrings. His eyes shot open. A black shape was barely perceptible, slightly darker than the dim room. Afraid that if he blinked it would disappear, Shikamaru stared at it, turning his head slightly. The shadow figure mirrored his movement. With a start, he realized that this was his mirror image, his very own shadow, as a solid form in front of him. He looked at it quizzically, wondering if it was real or if he had just cracked alone in this bunker. The tension was palpable as the silence dragged on. His shadow mimicked his slight movements perfectly, but then suddenly stood up and stepped back. Shikamaru let his mouth drop open, looking in disbelief as his shadow waved him to move, and pointed into the pitch black in a corner of the bunker. After a few waves, the shadow seemed to stretch, and Shikamaru thought he was going crazy at this point, even looked like it was yawning. His shadow then faded away. Shikamaru blinked and rubbed his eyes. Nothing there. Had he imagined it? He shook his head and stood up, dusting off his pants. With a sigh he walked over to where his shadow had waved him to. His eyes couldn't even adjust to the darkness in this part of the bunker. No light penetrated this corner. He felt around, then sat. It was different here, slightly colder. He looked around, straining his eyes, but could see nothing. He gave up and closed them, sitting as still as he could, starting his meditation up again. In the forest, far to the south of Konoha, the cougar approached the river cautiously. He sniffed the air abruptly. There was that scent again. The cougar didn't recognize the scent, but it did not smell like a predator would. Not that there were many predators a cougar feared save but one: humans. This did not smell human. It was like that pack it had seen a few nights ago crossing the valley. Whatever it wasn't human, so it wasn't a threat. He dipped his head to drink from the river. As he lapped his first gulp, his instincts kicked into gear and the fine coarse hairs on his back bristled. He tensed and leapt to the side, avoiding the animal that landed exactly where he had been. This was a strange animal. It smelled almost like a wolf, but its face looked like a human. It was on all fours, and its claws were long, digging into the earth where he landed. The cougar let out a snarl and lunged, its lithe body uncoiling like a spring, its fangs bared, claws reaching for the attacker. The wolfman sprang backwards to avoid his claws, but the cougar pursued him, not giving him time to recover. It was a frenzy of slashing and biting, most of which missed. The cougar felt the scratches in his side from his attacker, but he felt he would win. This was no animal. This was a man. A man who was fighting as an animal. With a mighty swipe, he knocked the man into the dust. He leapt for his exposed throat, but a small odd wolf leapt at him out of nowhere and hit him in the side where the man had scratched him. The cougar growled in pain and annoyance. He snapped at the small wolf, but it managed to avoid his teeth. The man had gotten up as well and they advanced on him. The cougar saw no reason to fight two creatures, so tensed, then fled into the forest. Kiba fell to his knees, panting. Akamaru came up and put his nose against him. With a grunt, Kiba stood up, ignoring the scratch across his face where the cougar had slashed him. He walked straight into the river, washing the dust and blood away with Akamaru watching him from the shore. "We're not ready yet, are we, boy?" Kiba said to his friend. He came back on shore and fetched his traveling bag. He reached in and pulled out the book from his clan. Unlike Shikamaru, and he was sure Shino, Kiba's was not an instructional manual, but a diary. It was very, very old, held together by bound leather. Inside was a piece of paper with a note from his mother. He looked at it again, sitting on the grass. "Kiba, to reach where you need to, there are no techniques or moves we can teach you. If we did, you would be as we are, helpless. You must surpass us. This diary belonged to your great-grandfather. His path is one no one has ever tried to walk again, but it may be the only way. Good luck, my pup. He stared at the note for a second before stashing it back in the book. He flipped to the last entry in the diary. So far it had been a chronicle of his great-grandfather's journey into the wilderness. He read again the line that had given him much to think about. Sunday. How can I hope to retain my civilized mindset and be an effective animal fighter? I've been out in the wilderness for weeks now, and I've hit a wall. If you are reading this, you would have as well. How do I progress? How do I get stronger? The animals are getting accustomed to my scent, but they know. No, I am not one of them. No, I am a man. No, I am weaker than them. I attacked a grizzly earlier today. My ribs are broken as well as my nose, but I managed to get away. Men are weak creatures. When did we lose our animal instinct? I will get mine back. Not through weapons or trickery will I conquer the beasts of this wild, but through strength. Not until I've ripped the throat out of that same grizzly will I have passed this wall. Maybe that's it. Maybe I need to stop even the pretense of being a man. Shed everything. That was the entry that had led Kiba to attack the mountain lion. He needed to test himself. The diary was not an instructional guide, as much as it showed how his great-grandfather had become the greatest dog clan ninja ever. Kiba had initially wondered why no one else in his clan followed in his footsteps, but after the first few weeks, he didn't have to wonder anymore. He had to abandon all contact with people, leave everything behind. Kiba saw the logic in it. Kiba had for most of his life been lazy. He admitted that. He'd enjoyed being young, and having no responsibilities. That had all ended when Danzo took over. In the Battle of the Valley against IWA, Kiba had found himself lacking. The brutality of death woke him up. Now here he was, sharing in a solemn pact with his friends to reunite in 1 year's time. He had to get stronger, but not just stronger. He had to be the strongest. His great-grandfather had stopped writing in the diary after that. He disappeared for a long time. When he re-emerged from the wilderness, he was more beast than man. Feared by enemies far and wide, he founded their clan in Konoha. Kiba laid down the book and put it in his pack. He stared at the river. He'd come to this spot on purpose. On the other side was the same wilderness his great-grandfather had gone into. A jungle older than any Kiba had ever seen. It felt old. Kiba felt the sting of the cougar's scratch over his face. His eyes got hard and he rose. He put the book in the pack and zipped it up. Looking around a bit, he found a small hollow in a rock and put the bag in there. He covered it with as many rocks as he could find. He looked across the river to the wilderness. With a nod towards Akamaru, he leapt from rock to rock, across into the wild. A beat after, the faithful dog companion followed along. Inside Konoha proper, Chuji looked across the table at his father. He had been receiving instruction for weeks now. Most of it was careful explanation of anatomy, and the effects their family jutsu would have on each part. Most of it was visualization. He had to imagine each body part growing. But it wasn't as simple as that. There had to be complete awareness of each muscle fiber, each vein, each bone. It was many times more intricate than people were led to believe. Chuji's head was already starting to ache. That's enough for today, his father said finally. He looked down at his son proudly. Chuji had been a different person since the brief war with IWA. And when Asuma and Enko escaped from Danzo, he suspected that his son, who had disappeared that night, was involved in the rescue. In truth, Chuji had not returned until much later the day after, exhausted. Choza had smiled as his son slept off his nighttime activities. Now Choza had never seen his son so determined. He had taken to the clan's teaching with a fervor he'd not seen in his son before. In truth, he had been worried about Chuji taking over as clan leader someday. He had always seemed so lazy. But this was a different boy in front of him. No. Not a boy, a man. Not yet, Dad. Chuji shook his head. I didn't understand that part about the tensile strength matching the size of the tendons. Tengaku, run faster! Noik ordered Calamity as she completed her first lap around the floating island that was Tengaku. She was up to 3 laps in the morning, 4 laps after lunch and 6 laps before dinner, which thankfully was always a free meal at Noik's restaurant. At least Calamity and Nagi saw it as free. Tenchi always made sure to pay the bill on time each evening after Calamity and Nagi passed out in their beds. If you have time to daydream, you have time for extra laps. Calamity groaned and kept running. Konoha Hyuga compound. Hinata's eyes snapped open, Byakugan active. Her divination was perfect. Only Niji had ever perfected the same skill to the same degree at such a young age. He had beaten her by a number of months, but he was a prodigy after all. Hinata had something her cousin did not though, and that was something to fight and to be better for. Not a petty concept such as revenge or fighting one's own fate, but someone worth fighting for. Suddenly shuriken, kunai, and nearly 100 other weapons flew through the air at the kneeling Hyuga heiress. Hinata began to spin, forming her unique signature jutsu, the Hack Rokuji Yansho, which was both a flawless defense combined with a precision attack at the same time. Her hands spun out and out, faster and faster. The chakra emanated from her palms and body, forming a perfect sphere around her. She deflected every projectile that Tenten fired at her. Hinata did not stop there though, she tried to pick up her speed even further. Spinning faster and faster. She used her chakra to not only form a defense, but to push her in the spin. Tenten kept throwing weapons at her, all the while her eyes wide at what she was seeing. Hinata's defense was still perfect, but it now emitted a loud hum, and it looked as if she was not moving but just standing there in a defense stance. She knew it was an illusion caused by the sheer speed of Hinata's movement, but it was rather impressive nonetheless. The weapons came in small bursts at first, and were blocked just as easily as the first salvo. And then they kept coming without end. The pile of weapons at the 10-foot range began to pile higher and higher, but not a single one of them made it inside that range. There was the sound of a scroll unrolling, and then the surge of chakra releasing storage scrolls. She ignored it. She was close to something, so close she could feel it. One of the kunai exploded the moment before it hit the invisible barrier, blowing away the weapons around it, and scorching the ceiling and floor. Except for the floor and ceiling that were within that 10-foot radius. There, the floor and ceiling were clean. Not even dust, let alone any of the explosion, had made it past the unseen barrier in place there. When she had initially started working on this jutsu, she would get dizzy and expend far too much chakra. Since then, her chakra control had increased to such a degree that she could maintain her yansho for up to several minutes in one go if needed. Her extra training with her father and the rest of the clan had been of enormous help in that regards. And yet she felt that there was something more, something she sensed was just out of her reach. Not another technique, but an evolution of all her techniques, something that would elevate her beyond her current level and allow her to help Naruto when he returned. It was eluding her, and that vexed her greatly. She slowed down gradually, feeling the strain on her body as it screeched and pulled to a halt. Hinata slumped to one knee in exhaustion. Okay, I give up. Tenten stepped out of the shadows with a sigh. How are you able to spin that fast? That was pretty awesome the way you blocked the blast, Hinata. Can you keep that up for very long? HM? Hinata opened her eyes and raised her head to glance at her sparring partner of recent days. She finally looked around, without moving her head a millimeter, and noticed the scorch marks on the floor. Oh. I hadn't even noticed. I've been trying to increase my divination range, but this seems to be my limit. I can see things at the maximum range of the Byakugan, and like Niji and Ai-san, I'm beginning to see a bit beyond it, but only shadows and vague chakra signatures. My divination range, however, the range at which I can affect things with my Jukin. Hinata looked around disappointed, her Byakugan deactivated now. Are you kidding me? Tenten exclaimed. You just blocked everything I threw at you. And you were spinning so fast that it looked like you were standing still. Not even Niji can do that. Heck, even Lee can't dodge everything I throw at him. Hinata's eyes went wide. That was it. That's what she was missing. It was so obvious, she felt like Jukin striking herself into oblivion. The problem with all of her techniques, all of her new jutsu was the speed at which she needed to move to make them most effective. Her body had to build up to it, and then slow down from it. She could push herself that fast, it was just her body was not conditioned to handle it. Her physical form was getting stronger, but her training so far was not equipping her to handle the speed she demanded of it. Speed, she recalled, she had seen only a few times before. Rock Lee fighting Gaara in the Chunin exams. And supposedly his teacher, Guy, was much faster, and Kakashi even faster when using his Sharingan. And then the traitor Sasuke had proven that it wasn't impossible to have above Jounin level speed at their age level. That's what she needed to complete her techniques, she knew. Excuse me, Tenten, I must speak with my father at once. Hinata immediately got to feet and was out the door before Tenten even realized she'd answered. Alright, bye. Tenten called after her teammate's cousin. Well, former teammate, she thought with no small amount of disgust. Promotions should not be handed out like their prizes at a popularity contest. No matter how much they were genuinely deserved, if the reason behind it was flawed, it was as good as useless. Danzo's temporary office. For your valor in combat and your dedication to your teammates and display of power and ability in the field, Niji Hyuga, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Jounin, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities enabled therein. The aide recited from the paper in his hands as a pair of Root A and BU handed Niji the Jounin vest and rank insignia. Niji put it on and attached the appropriate insignia where it needed to go and bowed low, first to the Emperor, and then to the root that had granted him the status symbols of his new rank. The ceremony, such as it was, concluded with 2 other IWA Chunin that had also survived the Battle of Wave, attaining the same rank. Thankfully no one but Danzo and the aide knew that Niji had actually been a genin only moments before, so there would be no conflict until later. That there would be conflict, Niji had no doubt. Fate was predictable that way, she loved conflict of all kinds. The IWA and Root Ninja were dismissed, leaving just Niji, the Emperor, and the aide, who immediately handed Niji a sealed scroll. Niji paused to glance at the bandaged Hokage, who merely stared back at him. Niji nodded and unsealed the scroll, but only after checking the room and confirming they were truly alone with his Byakugan, before reading the contents. He was not surprised by what he read. When would you like this accomplished, Emperor-sama? The newly christened Jounin humbly inquired. Not for some time now, Danzo answered. You are just one of many that I am giving this mission to. In the meantime, I expect you to raise your skills to match what this mission will one day ask of you. I do not mean that as a slight against you, Hyuga-san. My pardon, Emperor-sama, but you have just given me a mission to assassinate the Tenshikage of Tengaku, Niji interrupted in his normal emotionless tone. Even if he were to trust me after what happened in Wave, I know what he is now capable of, and I know what he was capable of when I faced him in the Chunin exam several years ago. I cannot tell the difference between the Tenshikage and the Tenshikage's clones. He has a level of mastery over the wind element that rivals my mastery of Jukin, and he attained that mastery in a short number of years, whereas my own came about slowly throughout my entire lifetime up to this point. He can destroy me at a distance without ever having to face me, while I would have to face 1,000 opponents just to be certain that I was truly facing him, provided I survived that long. Emperor-sama, there is no offense taken. If I could accomplish this mission at all, I would be greatly honored. I am greatly honored that you would choose me at all. But I am under no illusions that as I stand no chance against Naruto Uzumaki. Niji had to force himself to say his friend's name with the same derision he once had during their match at the Chunin exam years ago. Danzo nodded, satisfied. In the meantime, I'm trading you out with Guy. He's been in Suna, securing our position there long enough. You are to go and take over for him. He may have 1 week of leave time, showing you how he has done things there and introducing you to his contacts. After that, I expect him and his apprentice back in Konoha before the end of the week. Danzo-sama, if I may? Niji requested, sweating imaginary bullets even as he did so. Yes? Danzo's tone did not show it, but Niji could feel the killing intent fill the room. The Emperor was annoyed. Perhaps it would be better if I were to take over for my former sensei in regards to my former teammates. Hayashi-sama has actually requested that I apprentice Hinata-sama in Jukin. If I take her as my replacement and am assigned as Lee and Tenten's Jounin team leader. Danzo actually smiled. Niji felt like throwing up, but hid his emotions perfectly. Yes, that would all but kill the green beast of Konoha. Inform your teammate and your cousin. You leave tomorrow. I'll have the orders for Guy written up before you leave. Dismissed. Hi! Niji vanished in a flash of movement. Tengaku, Nagi fell down in a heap, only to immediately get back to his feet. Unfortunately, it still wasn't fast enough for Noik as the man verbally and physically berated him with that damn finger flick of his. Pathetic, truly pathetic. You are an idiot of the first class, without doubt. Poor Noik has much work to do. Again. Nagi didn't hesitate and spun around in an attack, a combination of kicking, punching, blocks, leg sweeps and dancing. That's how Noik described it. A dance of the most beautiful and lethal vision of energy and agility. He went on to say that Nagi was like a worm trying to move with coordination and grace, and failing pathetically. He was so clumsy and oafish that there was not even any pity to be had, only misery at Nuke's poor fate of being the one to teach this worm how to dance, and hopefully change it into a butterfly. Nagi fell at the same point, where he needed to do a flip kick before moving into a head spin. He kept getting dizzy and losing his balance right when he started to spin about on his hands. He got back to his feet and didn't need to be told to do it again. He still got flicked though, and grimaced at the pain. Nuke said something insulting, but Nagi was already focusing on what he needed to do next. He reached the same point in the kata, and right as he started to spin, he couldn't keep his balance, and he started to fall, except something was different this time. He couldn't even say what it was, but he knew what his body was doing, and he knew what to do and how to move to keep himself from falling. His balance was all over the place, he couldn't tell up from down, left from right, but his hands were on the ground, and he knew where every part of his body was at that very moment. He pushed off from the ground with both hands, keeping only his fingertips against the ground to keep himself oriented in his completely disoriented state, and then he twisted his hips in the opposing direction and bent his knees back until his heels were touching his waist, and he arched his back. His fingertips told him he was now parallel to the ground, so he pushed off against it fully with the one hand and then slapped his free hand all the way around, spinning himself mid-air while he was mid-fall and almost to the ground. When his hand slapped the ground, he pushed and folded his body inwards before kicking out with first one leg, and then the other, and repeating the kicks as he continued to flip over and over from one hand to the other, feeling dizzier with each flip, not even fully aware that he was a spinning and kicking tornado against the ground. Finally, Nagi's body could handle no more, and he knew he had to stop this and get his feet against the ground. So rather than switching hands again, he placed both hands on the ground and kicked out with both legs while he twisted his body perpendicular to the ground. His muscles screamed and pounded as he pushed hard against the ground, his legs straight in front of him, feeling like he was pushing against the ceiling and about to fall away into the open air, but he kept his focus and did a quick double somersault flip with a twist at the end, and the next thing he knew he was crouched with his feet flat against the earth, and his head was spinning. Good, Nuke was smiling, you begin to understand. The worm dreams of becoming the butterfly, and thanks to Nuke, you shall wrap yourself in a cocoon and emerge as a beautiful creature of enviable grace and agility. Again. And this time do not be so wild with your fluttering. Can I get some water? Nagi changed his request at the last moment, knowing that Nuke wouldn't care or allow him to rest if he said he needed a minute to stop being dizzy and get his head on straight. If only he had realized that Nuke had chosen those particular moves for the kata because they would make him insufferably disoriented every time, he would also have, eventually, figured out that the master of Senanju was actually trying to teach him how to handle being in that disoriented state, and still be able to fight no matter what. In the end, it didn't make a lick of difference. No, Nuke answered with a broad and happy smile, you may drink your own sweat, like the pigs do if you must. Again. Nagi hesitated only long enough for the awaited finger flick and he was back on the ground, getting dizzier and more disoriented with each movement. By the end of the day he felt like he'd always been like that, and that being still with the ground being down, and the sky being up was the unusual state of being. Run faster. Women are good at few things in life, and running away from a fight should be one of them. Women of Nuke's village were very good runners. They often spent the whole day running for spending the whole night in bed. Nuke called after her. She was now up to 10 laps in the morning, 12 after lunch, and 20 before dinner. Of course, any time Calamity dared to speak back or say anything to Nuke at all, he would berate her that, as a woman, talking was one of the things she was naturally best at, and that if she had breath left to talk, it was breathed better used in running even faster. So any time she had the urge to talk back against her teacher, instead she grit her teeth, bit her tongue, and channeled her anger into making her legs move faster and her lungs keep breathing. Nuke pointed out her breathing more than anything else. You must breathe. Why are you hyperventilating like that? Are you giving birth? Your body has all the air it needs from normal breath. Feel the air in your belly, not in your bosom. The worst part of it for Calamity was that while she was running flat out, Nuke was actually keeping pace with her. And he was barely breathing or moving any differently at all. Like he was out for a morning stroll, at Jounin ninja level speeds. It took a while for Calamity to understand what he meant, but slowly she was starting to feel the difference in her breathing, and how much better running felt when she wasn't blowing hard. It felt almost easy. The second Noik saw her improvement, he clapped his hands. The wonders of Senanju will never cease. For I have taught a woman to breathe like a warrior should. He smiled at his own words, then snapped at her. Finish your laps, then join me by the targets. Border of fire and rock country. Shino stared up at the mountain. The colony within him was buzzing excitedly. He allowed himself to analyze the feeling inside himself. He knew what his clan's book had told him, and what his own colony was telling him now. The queen was there. Not the queen of each colony, but the queen of all colonies. The mother of all insects. This creature was beyond centuries old, beyond immortal. Her colony extended out across the whole world. And what Shino was asking of her had never been done before in recorded history. Every year the clan leader would come here and pay tribute, offering a sacrifice that would appease the queen. Usually a few cows. But Shino was coming instead, not with an offering, but with a request. This had never been done before, none had dared. But it had been speculated that it would be the one way to surpass anyone the clan had ever produced. Shino's mind understood, but his fear was palpable. Yes, his clan book was full of techniques, which he analyzed and surmised he could master, but as with the others in his small colony, Kiba, Shikamaru, Hinata, Niji, Lee, Tenten, Chuji, he knew he must become greater to be of use. He trekked up the mountain path, feeling the billions of eyes on him, hearing the buzzing grow louder and louder, until he was at the mouth of the cave. It was enormous. Shino entered silently, navigating the winding corridors, following the buzzing guidance of his own colony. "Whyy have you come me to the All-Hive?" The voice whispered at him. There was a cacophony of buzzing and screeching overlaid on top of the voice. Shino steeled his nerve and spoke clearly. "I have come to learn to be a guardian of the All-Hive." The noise was deafening. Billions of insects all in an uproar. From out of the darkness a shape approached Shino. It was large, definitely insect in shape. Somewhat resembling a mantis. "You wish to protect the All-Hive? The existence of my children around the world?" The queen asked him again. "Yes. I wish to have the strength to protect the hive. I will serve the queen. In exchange I request the strength to defend my own hive." Shino continued. "You are bargaining with me? I who have seen your kind end one age and begin another?" The queen laughed. The shape morphed in the shadows and suddenly Shino was faced with a very nude, voluptuous woman who approached him from the shadows. "It has been centuries since one as bold as you has come to me. The last guardian of the All-Hive was killed more than 500 years ago. He was not much older than you." Her voice still buzzed and screeched, echoing in the dim confines of the cave. Shino realized that the light he was seeing with came from millions of tiny worms glowing in the dark. "Very well," the queen said suddenly. "I will make you into a guardian of the All-Hive, Shino Aburaim. Your colony speaks highly of you. Of your loyalty. I know of the danger to your hive to the south. A human named Danzo would destroy your pod. Those who have faithfully served me for centuries. I will give you the strength you desire. But for me..." Her voice seemed to almost hiss at him as she circled him, eyeing him up and down. "I have other needs than a protector. You will serve them once you have taken care of this problem with your home. Do we have an agreement?" Shino stood quietly for a minute, thinking. This was what he had come for, and the price, well, he looked at her in her human form. "It would be an honor, my queen." Tengaku target range. Nuik had set up a target at the end of the long field. On the other side of the chambers the students of the academy were going through, with permission from Tenchi of course. Calamity arrived to see him put a bag down and motion her over. He pointed down towards the targets. "How many targets do you see?" She looked. They were a mere 100 meters away. "Two, Master Nuik." He smiled slightly. "You have the eyes of a normal woman. That is expected. Seeing what you expect to see. Look beyond the obvious targets and tell me what you see." Calamity prided herself on her eyesight, and so she strained hard, looking past the two targets into the forest past the field. After a few seconds she saw something. Was that a sliver of color? "I see something. Something red." Nuik nodded. "Your eyes are better than a normal woman, I stand corrected. There are two more targets 100 meters deeper in the woods. There are many trees and even a bamboo patch in the way. When you can hit those targets you will have passed phase 1 of your training." Calamity looked incredulous. "But that's impossible." Nuik reached into the bag and withdrew a small arrow. He didn't even look towards the forest before flicking the arrow. It shot across the field and into the woods impossibly fast. Go and see what is impossible for the master of Senanju, he declared, obviously waiting for her to do just that and return. Reluctantly, Calamity made her way across the field and into the forest, at a run. She knew what she would find though before even getting there. Hidden in a thicket, past countless trees and, yes, even a bamboo patch, was a small red target. In the exact center was the arrow Noik had thrown. Calamity looked at it incredulously. She couldn't even see the field from here. She plucked the arrow and ran back. Are you finished doubting the master now, child? Noik asked with what he thought was magnanimity but really came across as condescending. Yes, master, Calamity nodded. Noik reached into his bag and withdrew 2 rubber balls, tossing them to Calamity. When you do not have a bow in your hand, you will have these. You will squeeze them until I say you have done enough. Now I have here your longbow and some arrows. Show me how you will hit these 2 targets in front of your face. Calamity obliged, drawing her bow, feeling the tension in the string, and releasing. Her arrow flew true, and hit the dead center of the target. Noik nodded. You have passable skill with the bow. However, you rely on what you can see rather than what you know. There is only one way to break you of this habit. He dumped the rest of the contents of his bag on the ground. At least 200 arrows fell out. You will fire every single arrow here into that target. You will not damage any arrows. When you are finished, you will repeat. Tomorrow you will run 20 additional laps of Tengaku, then come here and do it again. I will break you of this habit, or I will break you. Either way, my promise to Lord Tenshikage will be fulfilled, as I will have tried to teach you. Calamity picked up her first arrow and fired at the second target, perfect center. She reached for the next and saw that Nook was gone. She resigned herself to her task and fired again. This one had to be slightly off-center, so it wouldn't damage the first arrow. Sakura pulled her fist back and let it go, taking a large chunk out of the boulder that was hurtling towards her. Tsunade didn't give her a breakthrough, sending another one flying immediately. Sakura was dripping in sweat, having been doing nothing but this for the past half an hour. She destroyed the next boulder as well, atomizing it. Tsunade frowned and stopped. Sakura, you need to mix it up. You can't keep using just your fists. You must learn how to use the Fude no Kiwami from any part of your body. Also, the amount of chakra you're putting into each hit is still slightly off. Sakura made an exasperated noise. I've been doing this for half an hour. And that's after a full day of doing our medic nin training. Tsunade sent another, larger boulder flying. They were practicing at the place that Naruto and Senji had a long time ago cleared the area for the city and put the boulders they wanted to move. It was a veritable small mountain of large rocks. Sakura cracked that boulder in half with a kick, each half flying away from either side of her. She panted and fell to one knee, breathing hard. See? You're expending far too much chakra. Your reserves will take time to grow. The medic nin techniques you are learning will increase your chakra control to precision, and all our other training will grow your reserves far larger than a normal ninja's. But that's no excuse for wastage. What if you end up in a battle that lasts longer than an hour? Sakura nodded and stood back up. Again. She barely glanced at Calamity as she ran past on one of the many laps Noik had her doing of Tengaku. Run faster, lazy woman! Noik actually shouted at her as she ran, ducked, dodged, weaved, jumped, and practically flew over the solid cloud terrain, interspersed with solid ground, rocks, trees, bushes, and even Yoshi's ever-changing wall. He kept pace with her, having decided to join her and make her laps even more difficult. After a few more minutes of running, he shouted, "Stop! Fire at the target!" Calamity had to stop immediately, notch her arrow and fire from wherever she was, to the target back in the field. Wherever she was in Tengaku. She was terrified she'd send a wayward arrow hurtling towards killing someone, but Nook shrugged and said simply, "Don't miss." She had to be constantly aware of where her target was in relation to where she was. It took her a few seconds to get her bearings before she aimed up and fired. The arrow arced high in the general area of the training field. "You missed," Noik said. "Deplorable. Back to running. Maybe next time you can try to get closer than 5 feet from the target." Calamity did not bother to ask how he knew that. She just put the bow back on her back and started running again. Jiraiya held the modified Tengaku armband up to the light. Guerrero watched him inspect his work. Carefully he turned it over, the silver glistening in the midday sun. If someone just glanced at it, it seemed to just be the same as all the other armbands. A simple symbol on metal. But the changes were minute. It was no longer steel, but silver. That metal adding power to the second change. The Tengaku symbol was made up of no less than 50 special seals, done incredibly close together. It had taken Jiraiya a month to get them perfectly right. Then it had taken Guerrera a week to duplicate just one exactly in the pliable silver. If even one seal was out of place, it could be disastrous. It was made all the harder because the final seal made the silver unscratchable. A strike from a sword or chakra blast would not harm the silver in any way. This was to prevent the seals from being tampered with or disfigured in battle. Yoshi came over, looking at it as well, wearing 5 pairs of glasses, each one bigger than the last. "Is that seal there the one that channels the cloud infusion?" he asked Jiraiya, who nodded in response. Jiraiya pulled out a small vial of blood he had taken from Naruto days ago and put 2 drops onto the seal. It was quickly absorbed. The black seal glowed white for a few seconds, then faded. "Okay, it's done. It should work now," Jiraiya said cautiously. "Well, let's test it." Yoshi clapped his hands together in anticipation. "Not so fast," Guerrera exclaimed. "What if it doesn't work? Can't we try it on one of Naruto's clones first?" Jiraiya shook his head. "It won't work on clones. It has to be a real person. And it has to be someone who has been in Tengaku for more than 3 weeks," Yoshi chimed in. "The cloud particles would need to have penetrated the bloodstream." Guerrera looked at it dubiously. "I'm sure I copied the symbols exactly, but what if?" "Bah!" Yoshi grabbed the armband and put it on. "What ifs get us nowhere. We must be bold in the face of discovery." Before they could say anything, Yoshi bit his thumb and slashed it across the seal. In a flash of blinding light, he disappeared. They all looked around. There was no trace of the mad scientist. Jiraiya called out, "Yoshi? Are you dead?" They all heard a noise coming from the front of the tower, like somebody was sick. They ran outside to see Yoshi standing on the steps of the White Tower, right on top of the seals Jiraiya had etched there into the floor. He looked disoriented, his face turning green. He waved to them, put his hand over his mouth, then ran to the bushes and threw up his dinner from the night before. Guerrera laughed and clapped Jiraiya on his back, almost sending the smaller man tumbling. "Well, it worked." Jiraiya nodded with a grin. "Now we can use the wind streams to go anywhere, and not worry about trekking back home. Our warriors can be home with that modified reverse summoning jutsu. It just needs Naruto's blood to activate each armband." Guerrera smiled. "That will be good news for everyone." Anko threw her kunai viciously into the target. With a wrench, she pulled the invisible wire on the ends and they came free. With a flick of her fingers, they were back in her palms, and she let them fly again. She repeated this, picturing certain faces in her mind. She almost didn't hear the footsteps behind her. She swirled, her face a mask of anger and agony. Irika put his hands up to show he meant her no harm. She scowled at him, then turned back to her target to continue her practice. She wasn't up to her normal standards, but she was still in recovery from her ordeal. Irika watched her for a few minutes, then snapped his fingers, trying to draw her attention. She turned around frustrated. "What?" Irika looked grim. He stepped forward, putting his fingers on her wrist, and tapped. Anko knew the basic Morse code that all ninja learned, so she was able to decipher it. "Yes, I want revenge for all that was done to me. Why the hell wouldn't I?" she asked, practically shouting at him. He kept tapping furiously. You what?" she asked, her anger dying down. "Just you and me?" Irika nodded and smiled, pointing to his throat, and then tapped some more. "Yes, I see what you mean. But do you think you have the skill for that kind of work? You were just a Chunin teacher after all." Anko asked again, looking at Irika differently than before. Irika looked fierce, a steel edge in his eyes. His fingers tapped out very clearly, "Yes. Look around you, Anko. Anything is possible in this world with hard work and determination. Give me 6 months, and I will be better than you. Better than anyone." Anko nodded. Something about his face made her believe it. "I will also improve in 6 months, Irika. So don't think you're getting better than me just yet. You have a plan?" She watched intently as he tapped out his thoughts. She nodded again. "Yes." She smiled at him grimly, then turned back to her targets. Iruka walked away to do some training of his own. In 6 months they would be ready to return to Konoha. In 6 months they would be the perfect silent assassination team, or die trying. Iruka would protect all his students in Konoha, even if he had to kill every IWA or root ninja himself to do it. Kakashi watched Naruto go through the sage katas over the top of his book. He'd long ago memorized the contents of his favorite series, every single word, but it served to its purpose. Most people were reluctant to disturb him while he was reading it, and it gave him time to think. Naruto had come very far. Kakashi saw a lot of the fourth in him. Naruto grown physically to look almost like a clone of his father. His hair had gotten longer, and he was getting taller and filling out from all the work he did. It helped that he no longer ate ramen every day, of course. But more than the physical appearance, his attitude reminded him greatly of the fourth. Naruto had fully embraced the role of protector of Tengaku. His will of fire was what the third would always talk about as being at the heart of Konoha. Danzo had never understood that. He heard footsteps come up behind him, and without looking he knew who approached. "He's looking pretty good out there," Jiraiya exclaimed with no small measure of pride. Kakashi nodded. "Yes. He's able to channel the natural energy into his moves seamlessly." Jiraiya watched carefully, noticing Naruto's eyes while he followed the instructions of Pa Toad. There was a dark red shadow around his eyes, and Jiraiya could swear he'd seen his pupils become square. This was the only sign that he'd undergone any transformation of all. Sheepishly, Jiraiya recalled that even he could not use Sage Chakra perfectly, his face taking on toad-like characteristics when he did use it, and only if Ma and Pa Toad helped him. "He's surpassed me now," Jiraiya said to Kakashi, watching the katas wistfully. Kakashi was startled. "How can that be?" Jiraiya shrugged. "He's got a natural talent for it. It's like, if he doesn't know something is impossible, he can achieve it. I'd say right now he's achieved mastery of the sage arts. In less than 3 months. They watched in silence for a minute as Naruto started an all-out battle with some clones, trying to incorporate the sage kata moves. They saw a clone form a Rasengan and try to hit him with it. He dodged it, but the ground exploded with the impact, sending a cloud of dust flying everywhere. "I've been thinking," Kakashi said casually. "It's time he knew the truth about the Rasengan. That it's an incomplete jutsu." Humph. Jiraiya looked up to see Naruto flipping in the air, landing on the neck of one of his clones. "I agree. The fourth would have wanted him to be the one to finish it." They saw Naruto get some distance from his attackers and slowly pushed his hands out wide, then slapped them together in front of him at arm's length. A wave of wind slammed into the clones, dispersing them. The spar was over. His eyes had faded back to normal. "Hey Naruto, come over here. We want to talk to you about something," Jiraiya called out. Calamity stood before the targets, over 100 yards away, holding her body steady in a firing stance. Nook stood next to her, criticizing everything about her, from the way she stood, how she held her arms, how she held the bow, how she drew the bow. It was a never-ending tirade of negative criticism. And then came the switch. It was just a cattail reed that he would poke at whatever part of her was the slightest bit out of place. The pokes actually hurt, as bad as his finger flicks did, if not worse because the fuzzy end made her itch after it left. When he wasn't using it to poke at her to point out his criticisms, he tickled her with it. Not in the childish teasing way that could have been amusing, but in the extremely annoying way where he was doing the least he could to distract her out of her stance, which was quite often perfect once he'd stopped poking her. Not that Calamity thought there was anything wrong with the way she'd stood when shooting her arrows before, but she did have to admit that all the little nuances and subtle changes Nook had made to her stance made a bigger difference than she had expected. She could literally feel the strength of force she could put behind her shots now. It was phenomenal. Not to mention, she discovered when shooting in this stance, she actually had better control over her arrows than before. But the moment she moved the slightest bit out of her stance, the poking came back and the criticism started up worse than ever. The tickling, though, was getting really annoying. And she was starting to itch every place the fuzzy end had touched her, and that was pissing her off. Nook stopped the tickling for a brief moment, and Calamity allowed herself a short exhalation of relief, only to see out of the corner of her eye that her sensei was about to start all over again. Her patience snapped, and she released the string to block the cattail with the wood of her bow before immediately going back into her stance and redrawing the string. Noik smiled suddenly and exclaimed, "Oh ho, so it is that you wish poor Noik to rid you of your next most glaring weakness then? So eager are you to become a true archer that you would challenge the master of Senanju to teach a woman how to defend and defeat opponents both near and far? Bah! Though the master of Senanju can do all things, you ask for much. Much indeed." Calamity gulped and wished she'd kept her temper in line. Although, it had been a mostly instinctual reaction. Plus, she knew that at close range, there wasn't a lot she could do. She remembered the Battle of the Crescent Moon Kingdom, and how without her teammates, or Kakashi, or the soldiers around, she would have been overrun and taken out of the fight before it was even halfway over. Her small handheld crossbows were good at mid-range, and up to a few feet from her. But if an opponent ever got as close as Noik was to her right now, even with her crossbows, there wasn't much she could do. And she only knew a bit of grappling, and maybe a couple punches and kicks from watching Sakura, Hiroka, and others training and fighting. It would do her little good against a trained opponent. Though you are a woman and should not fight, Lord Tenchikage has asked poor Noik to teach you and turn you into a Daitenchi worthy of the true Tengaku. It will be an interesting challenge. Yes, and the master of Senanju never turns down a worthy challenge. Very well then. With that said, he started tickling her with the cattail worse than before, and Calamity had a feeling it would only get worse if she didn't try to block or stop him, but the consequences of leaving her stance for longer than the time it took to do so were too terrifying to contemplate. She managed to ignore it for only a few seconds before trying to block the next tickle attack. She immediately got back into her stance, only to get an earful of Noik shouting whole new criticisms at her, this time with the way she had used her bow to block the attack as well as why it took her so long to retaliate in the first place. Interspersed with renewed criticism about her stance as her elbow was slightly lower than it should be, and her fingers were placed too high. And so her training continued. "So, it's not complete?" Naruto asked in astonishment. He'd long ago figured his Rasengan as one of his most powerful attacks. Of course he had some wind attacks now that were formidable, but the Rasengan was one of the most effective ones in his arsenal. And besides, it was his dad's special move. It had a certain place in his heart. No. The fourth wanted to take it beyond what it is now. You see, Naruto, the Rasengan is pure chakra. It is a shape transformation of one's chakra, forcing it into a ball. But that's only the first stage. That stage took Minato 3 years to figure out. Unfortunately, he died before completing the rest of it. Kakashi said aloud. Naruto looked puzzled. What's the next step? Jiraiya replied. Introducing your element into the Rasengan. So far you've just managed to manipulate pure chakra, but you've also simultaneously got to put, in your case, wind chakra into it. Naruto allowed his mouth to hang slightly open. Is that possible? I mean, I have some wind techniques that convert my chakra into wind, but the Rasengan already requires so much. Exactly. Either of us, Jiraiya pointed to Kakashi, have been successful in adding elemental chakra into the Rasengan. In fact, my attempts to add my lightning element failed, but it did lead me to the creation of the Chidori. Kakashi said. Naruto nodded, and formed a Rasengan in his hand. With all the guidance from Tenchi and Jiraiya he'd been receiving, along with the advancement of his sage techniques, he'd been able to form a Rasengan in his palm without using a shadow clone. But it required immense concentration. He'd not gotten to the point where it'd be useful in a battle. Most times he'd still need a shadow clone to help him form it. Not that that was a huge problem, he could form an almost unending string of clones. The very idea that now he had to do something else on top of just forming the Rasengan was daunting, but if it was his father's unfinished jutsu. Okay, so where do I start? What's my first step? He asked, looking at the spinning ball of energy in his palm. Jiraiya and Kakashi looked at each other and shrugged. We don't know. I mean, we weren't able to do it, so if we give you pointers it may lead you down the wrong path, Kakashi said. Jiraiya nodded in agreement. Take your time and think about it. Come at it in your own way. Maybe then you'll be able to complete the jutsu. Naruto allowed the Rasengan to dissolve and looked at them. He nodded and walked over to the training grounds to continue his sage training with Pa Toad, who was waiting impatiently. Nagi collapsed exhausted in his bed. He managed a small grin, but even that hurt. He couldn't decide if his new sensei was a personification of evil itself, or if he transcended evil and made evil look like a fluffy puppy in comparison. Regardless of how he felt towards Noik, it was hard to argue with results. Nagi felt a lot more cohesive about his capoeira. It was becoming instinctual. Whereas before he knew how to fight because he practiced sequenced moves, he was beginning to understand the flow of his martial art. It really was a deadly dance, and he had to let the rhythm flow out of him. He sunk into a blissful sleep, dead to the world. The flames leapt and caught the curtains. In truth, the fire seemed to have a mind of its own. "Get behind me," the man said, pushing a woman behind him, taking a defensive position in front of her. The fire jumped from wall to wall, arcing toward them. The man danced in place, his left leg arcing behind him, then the right, then he was spinning in midair, deflecting the fire with a sweep. The fire regrouped and, incredibly, seemed to stand before them. "Ah, Your Majesty." The voice in the fire crackled as it spoke. No one present seemed surprised by this. "Your time has come to bow. Bow to your new master. The day I bowed to you has not come yet, Shosho. You and your thugs will pay for what you've done," the man said. The woman clutched a baby in her arms tightly. The man seemed to coil again, as the fire leapt forward. It was an incredible sight, the man spinning and kicking, sweeping and dodging in the middle of a raging firestorm. But it was to no avail. The fire engulfed him and he fell to his knees, looking back at the woman. Run. The woman turned to go, but was struck as well by a lick of flame, catching her clothes on fire incredibly fast. She held the baby away from her clothes and dove out of the castle window, aiming for the immense lake that was a mere 15 feet away from the back wall. As they approached the water, her skin already smoldering, she whispered quietly, "Nagi." They hit the water suddenly, her body taking the force of the fall, cushioning it for the baby. Nagi woke up in a cold sweat, eyes bulging. Mabry surveyed the wagon train full of goods. 15 wagons in total. This was the first trading shipment Tengaku was sending out. The merchants had been clamoring for it. The town needed to sustain itself, and this would be one of the ways. The citizens wanted to be useful in building their city as well. Inasmuch as it was a hidden village, they recognized that this was a fledgling city and needed trade. They needed to earn money. So various merchants had manufactured the very best items they could. Clothes and tapestries of the finest quality Mabry had ever seen. The care taken in making them was evident. There were pots and pans that looked sturdy and useful. A clockmaker had his wares in one wagon as well. A junk dealer had a wagon full of antique items he had carefully restored from the garbage pile in the center of the island. Mabry was sure many of those items were extremely valuable. The merchants were offering him a percentage of any earnings, but he declined, saying instead they'd pay it as tax to the village council. Of course, the trip was also serving as a test mission for the first batch of academy students. While Genesuk, Siren, Miran, and Inari had taken part in the wave defense, that had been with help from the Tenchi-level warriors, and the council, plus a hefty dose of thousands of Naruto clones. This was to be their first solo mission. Only Mabry was going along as their supervisor. The team walked over to him, looking excited at the prospect of their first E-class mission. Team 3 reporting for duty, Master Mabry, Inari said, a little over-enthusiastically. Mabry grimaced. Okay, first off, he stood tall, pulling himself to his full height. "I am not Master Mabry. I am the magnificent Milford Mabry," he said loudly, 2 small explosions and a puff of smoke going off in his outstretched hands. Inari and his team looked at him dumbfounded, a single bead of sweat forming on each of their heads. Except for Genesuk, who was looking in the wrong direction. He did that often, for his own fun, playing up the being blind angle. Inari said. Okay. Magnificent Milford Mabry. Team 3 reporting, sir. Mabry grinned widely. Excellent. You tend to acquaint yourself with every merchant in this train. We leave in 5 minutes. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Yomi, land of the dead. My Lord Magnus. Jihun groveled before his king. I have found traces of Kyubi around the world, but nothing of where his lair is. The king shifted, his armor grating in the bone throne. The glow of unholy light and smoke escaping from the spaces in his helmet flared up momentarily. Fool. I gave you a simple task and again you fail me? I have found the lairs of the other tailed beasts. Jihun offered, trying to find some way to save himself. What do I care where those weaklings are? Lesser demons too afraid to return to our realm. They are of no consequence. The king stood and walked forward. Yet, perhaps, Yes, he said, thinking aloud. It may draw Kyubi out if the other tails were captured or killed. Magnus pondered. Ji-hoon saw his salvation. Brilliant, my lord. I can do this for you. Magnus looked at him with disgust. You will do no such thing. You have failed me enough. You will guide my generals to these tails. With a wave of his hand, 3 other figures appeared, flanking Ji-hoon. He stared at them incredulously. Magnus had many generals, but Ji-hoon knew these by name, whispered in fear even among the damned. They too were half-breeds, possessing the cursed human blood that would allow them to walk in the sunlight. Go now. Kill the tailed beasts and draw out the Kyubi, Magnus ordered thunderously. Makes by Joshua the evil guy. Monkey throws banana. Senji was walking along the marketplace one morning, on his way to the training grounds, when he saw an unusual sight. A citizen entertaining a group of children too young for the academy. He was juggling. He had an idea. A few minutes later at the training grounds saw Senji trying to juggle his swords. That evening, just before sunset, Senji was practicing his new move, Monkey throws banana. He shouted and threw his right kodachi at the target. The blade lit up with energy and spun like a massive saw blade, atomized the target, and then looped back around where Senji caught it with another shout of, Monkey grabs banana. Hop step. Senji was walking along the marketplace one morning, on his way to the training grounds, when he saw an unusual sight. A group of girls playing some kind of game that made them hop inside numbered squares drawn in the dirt as they balanced on one foot at a time to retrieve a tossed cloth ball before reversing their steps. It was awkward and imprecise, but the muscles being exercised by the game were the same as what he used when using his flash step. He had an idea. A few minutes later at the training ground saw Senji playing hopscotch to improve his flash step. That evening, just before sunset, Senji was practicing his new move, hop step. He called right before there was a series of blurred arches all across the field. It might be a bit slower, not the near-invisible speed of his flash step, but it did allow him better maneuvering, which allowed him to attack, defend and dodge while using his high-speed move.